2025. In attendance this evening is Kate Sibby-Dunn, Dr. Joe Gibbeling, and myself, and remotely joining is David Hiltz. Our chair, Anne-Marie Mazzola, is currently out of state. She might try to join us remotely later if she can, but as vice chair, I'm acting as chair for the meeting this evening. First order of business is if I could ask everybody in attendance to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I should say that we actually were in open session at 6 o'clock and went into executive session, and now we're back into open session at 7:13. So we have on our agenda approval of minutes. There's 3 sets of minutes on the agenda, but I am going to ask that the January 29th executive session minutes we pull and talk about those in our next executive session before we approve them. So I am looking for motions to approve the January 15th executive session minutes and the January 29th open session minutes.
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second? Thank you, Joan. So since we are hybrid, I do have to poll individually. David?
Yes.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes, for the January 15th, abstain for the 29th.
Okay. Did you get that, Donna?
Yes.
Okay. And then I am a yes as well. Next order of business is correspondence. Mr. Luff, do we have anything this evening?
We do not.
Okay. Next is a warrant report. Let me see if I can get into it. That was signed by Anne-Marie. So Anne-Marie reviewed and approved the warrant for us. The first was a payroll warrant in the amount of $2,018,110.54. The second one was for school nutrition, $97,772.45. The third was account payables, $32,246.40. Also account payable for $71,688.11. Account payables, $11,639.79. Account payable, $14,986.89. Account payable, $3,466.52. For a grand total of $2,249,910.70. Are there any questions on the warrant report for Mr. Luff or Mr. Mannion? Okay, seeing none, we will move right along into public comment. So as a reminder to the community, there are a couple different ways that you can access our public comment period. You can call the superintendent's office by noon the day of our meeting to pre-register, and then you can either get a link and join remotely, or you can come and speak to us in person, or you can show up at our meeting and register at that time. Mr. Luff, did anybody pre-register tonight?
They did not.
And is anybody in the room here to speak with us at public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will declare public comment closed at 7:16. So we do have an appearance this evening about a field trip to Peru. So I'd like to invite Ms. Mulaney and Ms. McLaurin to please come join us. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you for having us.
So please tell us about your field trip proposal.
We are proposing a trip to Peru in April of 2026 that will combine, obviously, international travel to different heritage sites in Peru, and then community service working in the education sector, and a unique site visit to a pottery studio where students will be able to make a piece of pottery that then they can bring home with them as well.
I would just say that all the necessary components of the packet are here for your approval tonight. Sounds like a wonderful opportunity for the kids in the program, and I'm happy to make the recommendation to you to grant it as well.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee, comments?
When I opened the certificate of liability insurance, I must have put on the wrong thing. Sorry. Never mind.
Is it being offered to art students, language students, a little bit of everything? Who are your main?
It's open to
Everyone.
everyone.
Okay. In grades, what grades would be going?
I think we would just open it to 9 to 12. We're
Okay.
limiting it to 15 students.
15 students.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is our first international travel with students, so we want to keep it small and manageable.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
for everybody.
Makes sense. Makes
Yep.
sense.
And this is for next April 2026.
Mhm.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
I always ask this question, but the cost of these field trips we just see continue to increase, which I know is outside of our control, but it
Mhm.
does always concern me. So could you just speak to any fundraising opportunities that you'll be doing for the students?
Yes, so EFT will help us with fundraising. Each student will receive a page that they can then share with family and friends to help offset costs. And then there also will be some fundraising they will help us with for students to cover things like food and like tip and things like that that will happen on the trip.
Are there any other questions or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Joan. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kate. Any further discussion? All right, so I'll pull individually again. David?
Yes.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you
Have a
very
good
much.
evening.
Very exciting.
We're looking forward to the chaperone request. I'm going to be going on a lot of field trips.
Is that in your contract? All right, Mr. Luff, I think we have your superintendent's report next on our agenda.
I do. Thank you very much. I will start with the third one, actually, just so we can move from that. This is a late agenda item today. It came in because the family of Jill Driscoll wanted to create a scholarship in her name. This particular scholarship is for college-bound seniors who will study nursing, and they're looking at a $1,000 scholarship that will be effective 2025, which is fantastic. But I'm bringing it to you today because the funding will be received by March 1st, so that's why it's a late agenda item. But I am asking for your vote on this very generous scholarship today.
Are there any questions, or would anybody like to accept the scholarship funding?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the scholarship funding.
Thank you, Joan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kate. David?
Yes.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well, so that passes 4-0.
Thank you, and thank you to the friends and family of Jill who've done this. The next item on my report is my report of entry findings. This is not going to be a surprise to you because I've been sharing with you kind of the themes of the entry findings for quite some time. I'm just trying to find the right one. Here we go. So I'll share that. But this is generally about a 13-page document that summarizes all of the process that I followed in the entry finding, as well as the themes that I've been discussing with you as time has gone on. In the packet, which will be shared with the community at a later date, Dr. Munoz has shared with me how to do table of contents in a way that really worked well. So just by linking and clicking on the actual different parts, you can pop right down to that area, which is nice. So obviously, this is part of the NSIP program that I've been part of. It's one of the things that is not only recommended by the Partnership of Mask and Mass in providing this professional development, but it's also something that is part of my goals for this year. And so I've been told from the beginning that I should only place findings down here, and it's kind of you make findings and you don't do anything yet. That's all saved for the next year. So this is a little bit different because I've with the themes that I found, you've heard recommendations from me already on moving forward. I'm not a person who can just wait in some cases when I see things that really need to shift. So in the themes and recommendations for action, you'll see some of those actions have already begun based on the conversations that we've had and that you've been looking to promote. Obviously challenged incredibly by all the things that have been happening in Norwood, the wonderful things that have been happening through the elementary study, building of a brand new, beautiful Coakley Middle School that's opening up, multiple contract negotiations that have been occurring, all kind of got weaved in as we move forward. Just as a reminder to the community, the entry plan itself is linked here that I shared back in August. I created an entry plan. I started a data collection analysis process, received a significant amount of stakeholder engagement, worked with different teams within the school district, the administrative team, the cabinet team, our school folks, and you, right, and really tried to norm set and plan around kind of how we're going to roll through the year and collect data. And kind of make ourselves stable. Then I went out into the community and I tried to verify and validate those things that I was hearing, so I could actually see them and see them. I did. And now I'm in the analysis stage and presenting this to you. I believe I have it in here. I've met with more than 50 people individually. That ranged from school committee members to district and school administrators, school staff, town constituents, and employees, members of boards, students, parental groups, and the thought exchange that I had completed for this resulted in more than 475 members of the school community responding, and more than 7,000 ratings on ideas regarding the current state of the school system, which you've heard regularly in the themes that I presented to you. The questions that I asked, and I always loved asking the questions, what are the strengths, obviously, what are those things that shouldn't be changed as I come in? What are those areas of need that I should be considering as I've come into the schools? And then what's one thing that I could do this year, by the end of this year, that would blow your minds, right? Or something that you would really be excited to see, essentially. Obviously, I got the answers, but again, I had to visit the programs, visit the schools to validate those answers. Tremendous amount of parent meetings, PTO, PTA, CPAC, coffees with the superintendent, and more to really give the opportunity for feedback to come outside of just the interview process. We've worked wonderfully together with the administrative team to understand the needs and the impact of the school as a whole. The summer administrative retreats, regular meetings with cabinets on who's got the ball, what are we doing, how are we running things, how are we looking at different things. And visiting the schools, I'm getting into schools, each school at least once per month. And that's been wonderful. The visits are, walking through the classrooms, talking with the principals about what I should be looking for and how I could support them. And then, having a conversation afterwards, what did we see, what kind of recommendations might we make, and did we see what we wanted to see, just to kind of look at it. So again, I shared with you already that this is only meant to share findings, but I felt I needed to have a conclusion section as well as some recommendation initiatives that I went through. I have an overview section here of Norwood as it is now with the overall school population by grade level and by school. I focus on the fact that the current district's population and how it's shifted over time. 58.3% of our population is high needs students, 16.6% English language learner, almost 25% of student with disabilities, and 40.4% with low income. And we have diversity in the district as well, with 53.5% students that are white, 21.8% that are Hispanic or Latino, and 13.2% that are Black or African American. There obviously, I'm not going to share with you, we're all in different neighborhoods and how we serve our students. And then I went into the themes here. You heard me already talk about the dedicated and passionate staff and the community engagement. So I'll kind of walk through these quickly, but those were huge strengths that came up in just about every interview that I had. Then I walk into the areas of need, which were the academic standards and the curriculum. There were calls, obviously, I will say people appreciated, it was kind of a split, right? People loved the academics. They thought we were doing a really good job. But there was a huge call for, horizontal and vertical alignment, so we weren't working in silos. And that we were really looking to raise those standards to ensure students were adequately prepared. We have pockets of academic excellence everywhere, multi-tiered system of supports, instructional leadership teams at our schools. We're about state average with our academics, with a lot of inconsistencies among the schools. Dr. Muniz shared with you a report of academic pieces in the fall that is here as well. There was a significant drop-off in achievement after the pandemic, but we're slowly raising that back to where we were prior to pre-pandemic. But I do note here that special ed, low-income, English language learners all continue to see significant challenges. We saw accountability requirements kind of going up for there. But that is an issue with those populations of students and their academic performances. So this is where I go in and talk about my PLC structures and how we really need to look at those PLCs and look at the horizontal and vertical environment. And I'm, recommending the consideration of doing these things. And with the school year calendar and the additional PLC stipends that we're looking in the FY26 budget, these are things that could go and move forward that way. And then obviously the curriculum coordinator, department chair mantle to align the vertical curriculum all the way up are things that we can look at. A lot of concerns came up on special ed administrative support. The level of support, being on the ground, right, within the schools to understand the needs of staff, understand the needs of students. And with that, we're, also in the process of hiring a new director of student services beginning July 1. And that person will also benefit from having somebody in the schools, close to the schools, to really understand what's happening there. Need for more support staff. Obviously, behavioral challenges to provide and mental health support are things that were really desired from all constituents. We do have behavioral support staff. A lot of them are focused on special education right now. So what are we doing for the general education students as well to do a lot of preventative measures and interventions there? Right now, many of our principals are focused on the behavioral interventions and not instructional leadership. Even though they're trying to do that, it's really difficult to kind of do it all. So that is a question. Equity and inclusion, as you can see here, right? People want inclusion, and we have inclusionary models. But the question is, are they meaningful at the time? Are they really working? You can look at the heat map here that was shared from the state. Chronic absenteeism for our low-income students, Hispanic and Latino students, are very high. Out-of-school suspension rates for our students with disabilities, our African-American and Black students, are very high. The ninth grade passing rate, very not great for English language learners or African-American and Black students. So you can see that there are some significant, even though we're including, it's not as effective as we'd like it to be. So there are questions about what can be done there to support that. And we've had a change in enrollment over the past 10 years. That's very different. Norwood is not what it looked like 10 years ago. And we're hoping now that the student service program audit, which was another initiative that was in play, can provide more insight on what we can do with changes there. There was also a district equity audit, obviously, that was done. And there were some incredibly great shared initiatives that were put into play for bettering the system here, including the accountability structures and have a shared vision and understanding of equity. The rigorous instruction with equitable supports for our special education and English language learners especially. The inclusive learning environments and leading with a diverse staff that's representative of our student body and fostering a culture of affirmation, inclusion, and belonging and partnership across the community, all incredible goals. So some of the considerations that I have here is enhancing that administrative model to be more school-centered, to provide that school-based support and on-the-ground understanding of students' programming teaching strategies, streamlining that communication among parents, school, and staff, as well as providing meaningful support structures at each school. Obviously, that's something that I have recommended to you through for next year. And hopefully, as new staff come in, the director and coordinators, they can take that audit and the findings in May and roll with it as a game plan for moving forward. The addition of additional behavioral support staff, right, and training and incentives to support those staff within the district to do the best job that they can do. Some things here, the director of student services currently does investigation, does a lot of different detail, doesn't have the time to focus on the SEL pieces, right, that possibly a part of that role. That's the social emotional learning piece. And to provide support around MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support. And so providing avenues for that person as they step in to take some of those job responsibilities away to a different role would be very helpful. And obviously looking at PLC leadership funds, the director of safety, compliance, and communication position that we're putting into play, and funding for behavioral specialists are all things that we can do to really support that role. And obviously, reaffirming the initiatives of the equity on it, the next strategic plan. I think there are incredible goals that are there, and I think that it should be reaffirmed. Because the real question is, yes, the goals are there. You'll hear it later in the report. But are we able to effectively implement those goals and strategies in a way that you really envisioned in the first place? Safety and discipline, again, significant concerns about bullying, violence, and need for stricter consequences for disruptive behavior. You have this data that was collected as part of a task force that we did this year with some pretty significant concerns, and that show the behavior that is being reported out from constituents is real, and it needs to be addressed. Disruptive behaviors, abusive language, disrespect, bullying, and fighting were noted in all as high in all school settings. And it also reveals that, again, the disciplinary actions for the selected populations are somewhat disproportionate, right, as compared to other students. So this is where I talk about the consideration of stronger oversight over safety and discipline, policy development, training and compliance, somebody that can coordinate safety training for staff, develop interventions and practices for student behavioral issues, and really operationalize those safety plans that we have in place to make them for a pathway to improvement in this area. Again, with the FY26 budget process, new director of safety, compliance, and communication position coming, those are things that would help with that area. Call for better communication between staff, parents, and students, as well as some more community events to foster a sense of togetherness. Definitely heard the community provides a significant amount of support. Definitely heard the teachers are dedicated, but there's a disconnect right between communications among the few. And so the school community really wanted a clear, meaningful, and prompt communication on important events and issues. So how we get there is something to consider. And this is where I talk about district-wide system and personnel addition to establish those more cohesive communication procedures and even a branding for our district. Somebody that can focus on safety at the core as well as around succinct communication practices to help us meet this area of need. And again, with the FY26 budget process and the approval of the Director of Safety, Compliance, and Communication, that is something that you're moving towards. There was a strong desire for improvements in school facilities, really focused on updating the elementary buildings. The high school is relatively new, 2010 build. Coakley, brand new, opening up through the support of the taxpayers in August of 2025. Although safe, the 5 elementary schools do have issues with space, some deferred maintenance of infrastructure, and some older educational spaces. The facilities department does a great job. You heard them last time with keeping these buildings up. However, there was a clear request to consider improvements. Right, you just did the elementary study and voted on a new district redistricting plan that happened as well. So this is where you might want to look at future updates to those buildings outside of the redistricting, just to ensure the long-term educational needs of the students are met. So I want you to think 10 years down the road, right, what are they going to look like? Are we still going to be able to perform that maintenance? And do we look at those schools individually and make recommendations on how to make sure that they continue to be the top-notch educational locations for our kids? I have a section on budget. The school budget's grown in years. I think it has to be recognized. $50 million and change in FY22 to $61 million and change from the taxpayers from the operating this year. That is not including the grants and other revenue sources that we have, but they have increased that over time. But there's a risk of impact on the community, right, due to what we know is a structural deficit, right, which is we are not getting as much revenue in as we need to spend out, and that is a real significant concern that we have to consider. And even though we've received the funds from the district, they don't necessarily account for the specific enrollment needs that we've seen and the growth that we've had over the past 10 years. When the governor, and I'll say this over and over again, released the proposed preliminary budget for this coming fiscal year, she recommended a 6.8% increase based on our current enrollment and the needs that we have in this district, which was a $1.1 million addition to state aid that still has to go through the House and the Senate to be finalized. But that is based on the enrollment that we have, the high need students, the ELE students, the special ed students, all of those not challenges, but all of the distinct characteristics of the students coming in, which are not the same as they were 10 years ago. And when you're looking at the Chapter 70 allocation, you might also then generalize that to what the foundation budget should go up as well. So, we obviously look at an 8.1% increase is where we are now, with opening of a new middle school. So I think it just shows that the population has changed and there is a need for increased funding and resources for the schools in this case. But this has also, led to the conversation around stabilization funds and the depletion of stabilization funds. Most recently, the actual override stabilization funds, which are no longer available, as well as stabilization funds, one-time funds, $5.2 million that were used in FY25 to support the school budget. And free cash projections are going to be less, as you know, the projections are less as they have been in the past. So this leads to a conversation about a possible future override, which is something that nobody wants to have because it would significantly impact the taxpayers of Norwood. So the consideration here is to budget for FY26 and beyond in a way that supports the needs of our students, but also create structures to reduce the need for future increases. I think that's really important. So support for MTSS, curriculum needs, student service overhead, all of those may lead to a reduced need for special ed services and out-of-district services that may be realized through a lack of support within the building. So support the structure, support the foundation to hopefully have a reduced impact and support the taxpayers in the future. I couldn't stop and not have the strategic plan priorities that are here, right? Innovative instruction and personalized learning, safe and supportive schools, sustainable budget practices, all fit well in the frameworks right now for improvement based on the findings that I have. So you have right now these goals and initiatives that align with the findings that I've had. Obviously, as I stepped in, I've been working to operationalize those through the PLC development, inclusive practices, social emotional learning, safety procedures, and more, but also look at a reasonable budget to do so. You're opening at the brand new Coakley Middle School in August of 2025 for 5 through 8. You have done elementary study and redistricting, right, with the move of the 5th graders to Coakley. You thought it was prudent, and I agree, to reconsider the districting of all the elementary schools, and you made a decision to approve a 6 K through 4 elementary schools beginning in 26-27 to really balance the population of students and space. Looking for some efficiencies in student services. You look at bringing in an outside firm to do a student service audit. That the consultant is starting. You will start getting requests for interviews probably right after vacation, as will the staff, to review that. And again, those recommendations are underway. The relationship between the school committee and the unions, I think, are really strong in Norwood, which is fantastic. With that said, there were 3 contract negotiations that were being finalized at the beginning of the year, and there are 2 more that are beginning this month, actually. Again, with that said, all the budget implications and support for the staff are playing a significant role in this year's initiative. So I will say it's an incredible place. The teaching staff and the community are amazing. There are areas of needs all throughout this that are right now being addressed through your goals, but I don't think we're realizing yet, to the extent that we can, how to get to the full potential of those goals. There's a desire from everyone to have some pretty strong and significant improvement. The dedication of the staff, the importance of safety and discipline, and the staff, student and staff support are really a necessity to kind of move forward. Again, these are meant to inform strategic initiatives in the future to enhance the educational atmosphere for students. But I just really, truly appreciate every single person that has provided input into the entry plan and to what I think are some themes that align with what I see in the schools, but with also what we're going to try to move forward with in the future. So with that, I will take any questions that you have about this report of entry findings.
Thank you, Mr. Liff. That's very comprehensive. A lot of different directions we could take this. So questions, feedback from my colleagues.
I feel like we've been briefed over time, so this is a culmination and kind of a summation of what we have been hearing since you got here, so thank you.
Try not to have any surprises.
Well, you did a good job.
2 things. In August, when we approved your entry plan and how this was going to pan out, I think you had said you would start to work on the strategic plan in March. Is that accurate? I'm trying to look at it so I don't say the wrong thing.
I did not say, not as part of this process.
Okay.
So even though NISIP wants you to start it in the following year, my goal was after this was done and present to the community in March.
March, okay.
Then we would start looking at probably a 1-year interim plan, or right for the following year. So Next year, we do want to focus on what we're going to do for 5 years.
Mhm.
And these findings would feed into that.
Okay.
I do not think it would behoove us to have an entirely new 5-year strategic plan at the end of this year for the
Mhm.
next. But taking these themes, making a 1-year plan again,
Okay.
and using next year to really kick off
The
a
5-year.
comprehensive one that uses this feedback, but more feedback as we move forward.
So if we have another bridge 1 year, which makes total sense, and I know a lot of this is already embedded in the budget, but I am assuming it would be things in the budget, right? Like we're building off what we're currently in the process of creating.
Absolutely. So I would like to see these themes, right?
Mhm.
If you are okay with these themes,
Mhm.
be kind of how you're kicking off your bridge plan.
Okay.
And then, kind of transition that into the 5-year as well.
And then the school improvement plans would also tie in as well.
The ultimate plan, the ultimate goal for any district, I think, is to have, your findings, your strategic plan initiatives, your superintendent goals based on that,
Mhm.
and then your school improvement plans based on those, and then the principal, goals based on that. And then we have a data collection and review at the end, kind of a state of the union on how we've done, and then recycle.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
But we have, obviously there are, the actual calendar that you've put together and the way you've done that in the past, you have school improvement plans on the long-term agenda, I think, for May,
May,
right? So
yeah.
there are questions and concerns that I have about that, but
Yeah.
I think I'd like to get a better trajectory for that. We're working with you to do that, obviously.
Mhm. Okay, that was one of my questions, if we would still be doing that or moving it to the fall. I think at one point they were in the fall.
Yeah. It would be a better place for them in the fall, just because you'll have your strategic initiatives ready, I'll have my goals ready, and then the school leaders can say, okay, so based on what the district plan is, here's the school improvement plans as well.
Okay. And then one other question, embedded in the document is the safety data that you compiled for us. And is this the data that has come out of the safety committee that we have with Unit A?
That is the data that we shared with the safety committee, and we put that together and reviewed that data as part of the safety committee. Yeah.
Okay. And there's a lot here, and I don't know if my colleagues had a chance to look at it because it's embedded in the bigger document, but what is the appropriate time or place for the school committee to dive into that data further with you? Is that executive session?
I think it would be, but I think it's actually, that data is reported in all different ways.
Okay.
So what the safety committee right now is doing, and we just actually had a conversation last night about this, we're trying to align elementary and middle school and high school. So as it's reported, it's all consistent reported.
Okay.
The schools are reporting it differently.
Mhm.
Elementary level certainly different at different elementary levels. The middle school in a different way, and the high school in a different way. Some using our SIS to do that, and so we're actually looking at trying to develop recommendations to use the SIS so we can have a consistent data reporting system. Because as you'll see, it's all over the place. I mean, one school that's not even in there gave me individual reports, documented reports, because they don't have that way to disaggregate it. So I don't know that we can share it. It's just going to be all over the place right now. So I think I'd rather wait for the committee to make its recommendation
Okay.
on how it should be reported, and then after that, give you something.
Makes sense.
Okay.
more detailed.
And what is the timeline for when that recommendation will come?
So at our next meeting, next month, we're actually gonna, one of the things that we said is we need to get back together and review what recommendations we're gonna make and kind of operationalize that.
Okay.
So I think I can ask them what would be a good time to be able to present that.
Okay.
And I can give you that information. What's our next meeting, guys, do you remember?
About 4 weeks out.
Yeah, so
The second Tuesday in March.
second Tuesday in March?
It's-
Yeah.
Okay.
So possibly after that meeting, I can come back to you with a recommendation on.
Okay.
Maybe end of March,
All right, thank you.
with a recommendation of time.
Right. Other questions or feedback from anybody else on the entry plan?
No, thank you for the comprehensive approach, and there's a lot here, and it's, as Joan said, it covers what you've been walking us through it, so this is very helpful to pull it all together.
And it certainly doesn't cover everything. I will say that. There's a lot more going on. It's just a summary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olive.
Great. All right. Thank you. The next part is just a quick administrative search verbal update. So the Director of Student Service search is underway. Applications will still be coming in through the end of the week. HR and I met with staff and with parents separately on Monday evening to discuss the qualities that those folks would like to see in their next Director of Student Services. So we're trying to get a general overview and idea of what folks are looking for in that position. So we got some great feedback from both the parents and from the staff on that. The next step after we get the applicants and closed is we'll do some screening interviews as a central office and then provide a few candidates, 5 to 7, for a formal interview committee. I am eliciting members of that committee now. There's a list of folks that we need to be on that. There is a school committee rep that I do need to be on that.
For student services.
Yep, student
Yeah, you're
service.
stuck with me.
That's you?
Yeah.
You got it? So I'll make sure you're on that. I forgot. I wanted to make sure I remembered that. That's good. Thank you. So we have multiple folks requesting to be on that, which is fantastic. So those will be held on,
March 5th.
thank you, March 5th from 7:45 or so until 4. Prior to that, those members we'll have a back and forth on questions. So I'll be asking, after we have the membership, to have those folks submit questions that they would like to have on there. And then Lisa and I will kind of go through and facilitate what the best questions are. And so at the beginning of that meeting, when folks come at 7:45, the process will be discussed, how that whole day will kind of roll out, questions about confidentiality and all those things. We will try to get the resumes and whatnot out to those folks prior so they can have a quick review with the confidentiality signature on that kind of thing. And then we'll go from there. Hopefully that committee will then, through a very structured process, provide feedback on each of the candidates. And then we'll bring hopefully 3 candidates for visits, site visits to the schools, interviews with the central office, interviews with me. And then there will be an evening for parents and for staff to kind of have an open forum with the candidates prior to you making a decision based on a recommendation for me in March 26th. Thank you. So it's good. It's good. So excited about that. The Director of Safety, Compliance, and Communication position has just closed, so I'll be reviewing those applications shortly, and hopefully have a recommendation on or an announcement of appointment at our next committee meeting in March. So
Great.
that's it.
Any questions for Mr. Leff at this time? All right, well then we will move right along into budget. I can start by giving a very brief budget update. Last time I accidentally stole all of Mr. Leff's thunder, so I will not do that this time. Did not realize my notes and yours are the same, so I will let you read your notes this time. What I will say is that we met as a budget subcommittee last Thursday. For 2.5 hours. We always go over, and then had to go right into budget balancing committee. So last Thursday was a lot of budget discussion. As you will hear from Mr. Leff and Mr. Mannion, there were some things that came out of BBC that require us to revamp our budget timeline a little bit, and we needed to add another budget subcommittee, so we will be meeting tomorrow. So we'll be looking for some of your feedback and thoughts tonight as we continue to look at the budget again tomorrow, and then we go back to budget balancing committee on February 26th. So one of the other items that we do need to discuss with everybody tonight is the need for us to add another school committee meeting for before February 26th. But before we figure out the date, we'll get the budget update. So Mr. Leff, if you want to give us the FY26 preliminary budget status.
Sure can. So what you will hear tonight in a bit is a presentation on class size, fee, and grant analysis that was discussed as well at the budget subcommittee. We met with the BBC this past Thursday to review our 8.1% increase and receive feedback on how they would like us to look at balancing the budget. I will share that they requested we consider those things like contractual obligations, transportation increases, and the addition of what they said, around 5 staff based on what was originally requested when Coakley had opened, as well as some special ed tuition increases as a way to kind of do the baseline for what our request should be. That amounts to roughly, in that model, looking at a reduction of about 1.2 million. Obviously, the BBC is set up to kind of, as we get to Finance Commission, to kind of bring us in an agreement as we move the budget forward. Certainly, the $1.2 million there is not something that you have to agree to. But based on that, it's about 2% of a reduction to the current budget that we have. So it brings us down to about a 6.1% decrease. What I'm going to do, and Mr. Manning and I have been doing, is having a lot of conversations about what we could do to reduce the 8.1%. And so the idea is that we would bring that back to the Budget Balancing Commission on February 26th.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at some different tiered models for you to consider, where we can do some reductions to the current budget. However, we want to do that with you prior to going to Budget Balancing Commission. So this is where you may want to consider an additional meeting on the 24th or the 25th of February. I would recommend it's something that's online, it's during the day, or at a convenient time for everyone, or as many as we can get. So Mr. Manning and I can share that with you. We will be going to, we did schedule a new budget subcommittee to do that tomorrow. So I'm still working on that now, and Sean and I are still working on that. But we'd like to bring it to them and then back to you before we go back to Budget Balancing Commission on that. I won't even say this again. I've already said this again. But the 1.1 million increase to Chapter 70 is based on our October 1 enrollment. I still think the 8.1% aligned, and we're adding a new middle school, based on that. But there is some reductions that we've been asked to have, and 8.1% is a lot of money. It is a big increase, especially when we're looking at the no more stabilization funds through the override. And looking at free cash, that the projections are not there as well, for the following years. So we will work really diligently to get a good solid list together, with less impact, less impact to the district. I also will say that if principals again have requested staff for their schools, and if positions have been requested, I'm taking those as things that really need to happen, right, to move us forward. So we'll be looking at all different ways to reduce, not based on the new requests, but based on things that might not have been considered over the past 10 years or so. We'll go through. So with that, take any questions on the preliminary budget update.
If I could just provide a little bit more context around the BBC, and I'm reading my very messy notes, so Sean or Tim, if these numbers sound wrong, tell me. I think I wrote it down. So when we met with BBC the first time, the town had budgeted health insurance at an 8% increase. And one of the reasons that we met last week was because the health insurance numbers came in a little bit more concretely. And health insurance, as is everywhere, is going up. So the town had budgeted health insurance at an 8% increase, but we're now needing to budget at a likely 10 to 10.5% increase. So the first meeting with BBC, they were thinking that health insurance for school and town employees was going to be about $18.6 million. But now we're needing to budget 20.3. And because those health insurance costs are going up, that is why we were revisiting how do we make that work in the overall budget. So what Maya and Alan were proposing at the BBC meeting is that for general government, they asked Tony to look at his budget and bring back a budget that only allowed for contractual obligations and the cost of the trash increase. And then what they asked us to do, as Tim outlined in his memo, was look at our contractual obligations, our transportation increase with our new bus contract, up to 5 additional FTEs. And then I wasn't quite clear where they pulled this number from, but I heard them say $70,000 for the 9,000 code in DESE. Was that what we were estimating our out-of-district to go up?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what they had estimated that would allow us to cut $1.2 million from our proposed budget. I did push back at that meeting, and I did do quick math, and I don't know if Sean and Tim agree with me, they may not, but my quick math was if we did those things, if we kept these things that they said they would support, that we would only at most be able to cut $800,000 from our budget. So the ask of them was 2%, 1.2 million. I pushed back and said, I don't know how we're even going to do more than 800,000. So I do want to share with you that I had put that number out there in another public meeting. The challenge is, as you've heard before, our revolving funds, our override fund has run out. And using free cash is a huge concern of the Finance Commission, which I do understand. And it is the policy of the town that you don't want to balance your budget based off of free cash. And at the meeting prior, we were looking at using $8.4 million of free cash in order to balance the budgets for everybody. With the increase of health insurance, we were now looking at more than $9 million of free cash being needed. So again, that's what generated their proposal to ask us to cut 2%, which is $1.2 million from our proposed budget. Lots of discussion again around Chapter 70. And I know we're going to talk about legislative advocacy later in the agenda, but I just want to say now, and I'll say it again later, that I think we have a lot of work to be doing with our state around encouraging that Chapter 70 number to go up. So just wanted to provide that context.
What's the trash increase gonna be?
I don't know. I
They
don't have.
just
I
know
don't.
it's
I
gonna
don't
go
have
up.
those numbers. They had just asked Tony. They said to Tony, come back with a different budget that includes only your contractual obligations and your trash increase. I don't know if Sean or Tim know the trash
Tim.
increase number.
You know?
And then my next question is, and forgive me if I'm incorrect, but wasn't there a huge amount of free cash
20 million.
this year?
There's 20 million.
So what's the plan for that?
They want to carry it over into FY27 and beyond.
For what purpose?
If we infuse too much free cash into FY26, then it makes it harder to sustain FY26 budget. in the
Oh,
following
no, I
year.
understand the theory behind not
Yeah.
spending your savings, but I'm curious as to what the plan is, because that free cash was, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm recalling incorrectly, was not expected to be that high.
Mhm.
And so I'm just not certain.
So if our budget went through at 8.1%, we'd have to use around 10 million
Of that
free
free
cash.
cash. Yep.
With the 1.2 million reduction, we'd still end up right now, I think, using about 7 million. Is it six? It's
Yeah, it's
roughly
7 million.
I've
7
als-
million.
I've also heard that we're not gonna refill our stabilization funds with that free cash, right?
So the FinCom. and
Am
the
I
f-
incorrect on that, or not? I'm not,
We still are proposing a warrant article to fill up the sped stabilization. They seem
Being made.
open to it.
okay,
Yeah.
all right, so some of that money is gonna be put into like
It
the
could be.
quote-unquote rainy day fund.
Potentially, I think we're still proposing.
Yep.
Okay.
We're still proposing that.
We're proposing it, we have support to put that on the warrant.
Exactly.
Is where we're at right now with that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Okay, and then is there a plan to use that free cash to generate interest so that we can, like almost, like a retirement fund, right? You keep the capital and then
Mhm.
generating interest. So I guess I'm asking, given that there was so much more than we expected, what's the plan to use that to help defray the costs in a reasonable way?
Mhm.
Right, it's like if I get a bonus at work and I get a hole in my roof, I don't say, well, I'm not gonna spend the bonus to patch the hole in my roof, right? I come up with a plan. So
Yeah, I
just,
mean-
I'm curious as to what that plan would be, if that's put it in a bank account and then put it in a payment plan, so that using the interest from it, or what the deal is.
Yeah, I
I also
think-
don't get bonuses at work, by the way, if anyone wants to give me a bonus, feel free.
I think right now, I mean, whatever they use next year, right, let's say they end up using 7 million, around approximately
Yeah.
7 million, I don't have the numbers in front of me, to cover FY '26. That same 7 million would have to go to the FY '27 with whatever other increases we might have to have in FY '27, which might be the remainder of that free cash.
Yeah,
Plus whatever else we get back that, in the following.
You're talking about what's left after we
Yeah.
pay for the increases, because
Yeah.
out of the 20, we're talking about 10 needed for next year,
Mhm.
plus including the town stuff. How much did you say? You said how much it would be used for both?
Are you asking me about free cash?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
how much, there's
So-
a remainder still, and I think Joan's asking about the remainder.
Yeah.
Yeah, so with what they're asking us to cut and the general government to cut, they didn't yet come up to what they were looking for joint facilities. They need to dive into that budget more.
Yeah.
But with the increase in health insurance and with what they're asking us to remove, I should say remove, because it's not a cut, it's
Right.
a
Right.
removal from our proposed budget. They would use 7 million, about 7 million in free cash, and the current number in free cash is $20,652,677.
Right, so I'm not debating that we should be dumping all of our free cash into
Mhm.
the budget. That's not what I'm saying.
Yep.
What I'm asking for is it feels like we always go and we always get told to cut, but then
Mhm.
there's always this free cash hanging out.
Mhm.
And that what I'd like to know is what's the strategy for using that free cash? Like,
Yeah.
again, I equate it to my own, am I dumping it into a CD? Am I dumping it into a high yield money market account? Like,
Yep.
what's the plan for using that moving forward in a fiscally responsible way?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I guess that's the question that I'm
Yeah,
asking
so
for,
back
from
in the
BBC.
back in the fall, I know the Finance Commission had wanted a warrant on that town meeting about moving some free cash into a stabilization fund, like a holistic stabilization fund,
Yeah.
and the Board of Selectmen did not put it on the warrant. That's not a conversation I have any control over.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm
Um,
just asking
but-
if you could ask BBC kind of what
Yeah.
what a longer term plan is for this free
Yeah,
cash
I
that
do
we
know the
have.
Finance Commission wanted that conversation to happen, and the Board of Selectmen did not advance it.
Okay.
So there
Yeah.
could be room to advocate for the Board of Selectmen to get that on the May town meeting warrant. We are trying to get on the warrant, as we've already approved, that, the stabilization fund. Sean, if you want to remind everybody what that would be about.
Yeah, so the special education stabilization could be built up to potentially 2% of our required net school spending. And I looked at that recently from the end of year report, and it could be a little over $1.1 million. So right now, we've got 700,000. We're supposed to spend that this year, but we're projecting a surplus this year still of about 700,000 to 800,000, I think, from quarter two. If we end the year as we're projected and we have 800,000 left, we won't use our stabilization as we planned for 550. So we would still have 700 in there, and we could try to build that up another 500,000 to get to 1.1 million. We do, next year's budget is dependent on the 550 from the stabilization. Again, I mean, eventually, we'd like to not have budgets that are, I mean, another discussion is not having a budget dependent on the stabilization, so it could be more of a true reserve. Ideally, we'd have the full 2% of net school spending, or $1.1 million as a reserve, and not have the budget be dependent on that. We're almost double counting right now because we need to use 550 this year, but we're hoping we don't, and we need to use 550 next year. If we used both of those, we wouldn't even have enough right now with 700. So we do need to build it up somehow, and that's what we're hoping to do.
And I guess my question is what's the interest on 1.5 million? Could, like.
3%, I mean, something.
I'm not the numbers person.
Yeah.
A lot of money, more money
Yeah.
than I make, right? Like,
Right.
my point is I'm wondering what the longer term strategy is, given that we've got this windfall to generate additional revenue in a responsible manner, not just dumping it into the operating budget. Because I was surprised to see that we're at 5.8% high needs. Because at the beginning of the year, we're at 5.6% high needs. And I'm not saying you're wrong, because at the end of last year, we're at 5.54% high needs. So it's not like our need is ever going to go down. So how are we going to use our money in different ways to generate longer term relief, I guess?
I think part of the plan is with free cash, if you don't allocate it to something, if you can allocate it to a stabilization fund, then you can get interest by putting it in a stabilization
Yeah.
fund or something. If they don't allocate it, it essentially falls to the next year's free cash. So using, let's say, up to 7 million of free cash for next year's budget is more than the town's ever used
Yeah.
before. So I think they're saying, on the one hand, we don't really want to have the budgets using this much free cash, but on the other hand, we don't really want to cut services when we have so
Yeah.
much free cash. So I think if they can use an acceptable amount and get it through town, then the rest falls back to free cash the next year, which could propel through another season. So it's like, can we get through one or two or three budget seasons before an override would be needed?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to park that,
Yeah.
the max amount we can into a stabilization fund, because then we're generating $300,000, which is, then we only have to cut, right? You know what I mean? Like, that seems like a more, I don't know, I'm not.
That's
I'm
an
not
alternative way to do it. If it's a type of stabilization that you can vote on in a budget process, then you could get it back out the next year to build a budget off of. There
Yeah.
are certain types of the special education stabilization, I have to go back to the regulations on that one, but.
We do not accrue interest.
Yeah, no interest on that one?
No.
I'm
At
very
least not,
trustworthy. I'll
at
hold it
least
for
not
us.
with how it's set up at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Joan, those are great questions, and there's things that we we start and stop a lot of conversations at BBC.
Yeah.
That is one of them. The other one that we started and then never come to full resolution is around revenue projections.
Yeah.
Because it could be argued that a lot of the revenue projections are too conservative. And if you're too conservative in your revenue projections, then your free cash is higher. But if
Yeah.
you, perhaps in my view, more accurately predict your revenue, then you actually know the revenue for your budget, and then you're not constantly having this conversation of, well, we got all this free cash.
Mhm.
But we never seem to loop that conversation either.
Yeah, I'm not arguing we should be using free cash to pay all of our, I'm
Yeah.
just, what's the plan?
Yep.
Yeah.
Kate?
Quick question about the transportation request. Can you clarify what BBC is asking? We have no control over the cost of transportation.
Right, so they're
right?
just saying if we have an increase in transportation, we know that's coming, it's not something we can control, so they're
Yeah.
okay with having that as the baseline increase in the budget. Like, that's okay.
They're kind of using the logic of, if you project out all of your contractual salary increases, which I think was like 3.8% increase, plus your transportation, which we said was like another 1.5, plus add 5 positions for Coakley, that's what we were willing to give you. And when that worked out, it was about 6.1%.
Oh.
So they're kind of saying, here's how we're thinking of what we're comfortable moving forward with, and that's the basis. In the town, they were sort of doing the same thing, saying, take your
Yeah.
contractual plus your trash, and that's kind of what
Got
we're
it.
comfortable with.
Thank you. That
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand the way you put that. That's how you got to the 6.1. Okay.
Well, not us. We didn't get to
Yeah.
the number.
No, I
I
understand.
still refute the number. It's on the record last Thursday. I think the number's wrong.
But they weren't asking to try to figure something else out with transportation. I just was
Yeah.
confused about
I
the.
think
it's fine.
honestly they were trying to figure out how are we going to approach this, which is very frustrating because we were supposed to have that conversation over the summer and into the fall, but here we are again in February trying to figure it out. So hopefully, once we figure out FY26, we really can start early on FY27 and beyond, because with the override pledge, we had parameters. We no longer have parameters.
The good news is we got a nice preliminary budget to give them early on, so.
Yep.
Yes.
Right.
And on the town side, I do believe, I didn't watch it, but I do believe Tony presented his preliminary budget to the Board of Selectmen last night. I believe that was on their agenda.
Mhm. And Finance Commission's meeting tomorrow night, I understand. Is that right?
They are,
Yeah.
yes. Which, did we get them the information?
Yeah, we give them the information.
Right?
I think so.
Okay, so the Finance Commission has access to what the school committee has already seen. But then tomorrow, we're meeting as a subcommittee to get ready for the next BBC, right? That's
That's
the
the
process?
idea, yeah.
Okay, okay. All right, so Mr. Luff and Mr. Mannion, do you want to continue with the different cost center reviews that we have on the agenda for tonight?
Okay, so what you see in front of you is a memo regarding 3 cost center reviews that pertain to the FY26 preliminary budget. One is an enrollment analysis, and we will begin with that one. Later on in the memo, you will see the areas on fee analysis and grant analysis that Mr. Mannion will talk about. I have invited Dr. Galligan and Dr. Frax here to talk about the enrollment analysis for the high school and the middle school, and I will discuss the elementary enrollment analysis as we move forward. Just as a quick overview to Dr. Galligan, what you're going to see in his analysis is a picture of the current average enrollment for most of the sections provided in both academic and elective areas. These offerings are based on the premise of what is a long established practice to give students a voice and choice in their educational pathways at the high school. And I just want to lay out the idea that simply modifying one section doesn't establish any significant savings and actually results in a domino effect on all the other offerings that we have. And some of the less attended sections that you see here that Dr. Galligan will refer to are the result of piloting certain electives, right, to see if they're going to be ones that we'll have in the future. Many result in more student attendance in later years, and others we consider the reduction in certain electives if they aren't highly attended. So I will bring up Dr. Galligan to kind of go through and talk about the enrollment analysis at the high school. And I will pop that one up here as well. I'll share this tab. Thank you, Dr. Galligan, for being here today for this.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to talk for a couple minutes, just give a brief overview of enrollment, class size, and kind of the intricacies to a certain degree of the master schedule at Norwood High School, and then reserve some time for questions, but don't want to take up too much of anyone's time either. We could talk about this for days and days, so I would love to entertain that at some point. The master schedule is really what makes a high school work. And so for many, many years, we've prioritized through our school improvement plan, student voice and choice, and student access and opportunity. This is exactly what you see here. We've broken it down for you by academic content area. So you look at class sizes in, for example, math, science, history, social studies, English language arts, and then we look at some of our elective areas. I did break it down just for the sake of clarity. Most commonly, we have honors, college, AP, in terms of levels at the high school that are available for students to meet their individual needs. And so I've broken that down as well. You will see that by and large, you have most of our core content academic classes falling in the average range of 17 to 23. And that's pretty average and typical. When you see courses like Algebra 1, Geometry, English 10, Chemistry, right? These are courses that pretty much all students will take throughout their high school career. So you have many, many, many sections of them that we're offering. So this is not 20 students, this is 20 students on average in each section, right? Across many, many sections. And so within those core, you see a pretty stable year-to-year average, okay? Where you might see some of your lower numbers, oftentimes, as Superintendent Luff referred to, it might be something that we're attempting to build up, a new course, a new program, we're trying to draw interest, and we're going to let that play out for a few years. It also might be something with anywhere from 1 to 3 sections of that course, a small number of sections. For example, you could have, in 1 year, 46 students that select a course, and you're going to look at that and say that is we can do 2 sections of that, and hedge our bets that neither one's going to be outrageously large. All right, and keep in mind that when you have 46, it's not like you can just say 23 here and 23 there. The schedule is going to be configured to meet the most course requests possible. So you could have 46 and have 20 and 26. Or any other configuration that makes the kind of greater good of the whole schedule work. So you might have that, and then the next year in that you might have 54. And we're going to say, well, 54 is kind of too much to do 2 sections, right? We're going to have 3. So then your class average automatically in that year is much lower and just looks lower, right? But so anytime you have a course that runs 1 to 3 sections, you see more variation year to year in what these class size averages are. You take a look at a couple of the maybe AP courses, and that's what you see there too. Sometimes we have some mobility in courses, and again, 1 to 3 sections typically of a lot of these, right? So you might have something where you had a number where you decided to run 2 sections at the beginning or 3 sections at the beginning, and some students might have made the decision over the summer at the beginning of the year that while they really wanted to do the AP course, they started out and found out that it's not in their best interest to do so. You might have some movement. It's too late to rearrange everything, right? So sometimes something like that happens. But again, what you really do see is, for the most part, courses in that kind of 17 to 23 range. I will note, I wanted to find out if our class sizes were if our averages were average. And so there's not a whole lot out there on this, but Massachusetts Department of Education did a policy brief and a class size analysis back in 2018 on this, and it's pretty interesting, but it did look at this trend where from K to 8, you see class averages pretty much getting a little bit bigger each year. First grade bigger than kindergarten, second grade a little bit bigger than first grade, and so on, all the way up to 8th grade, and then much smaller again in high school across the state. And in that year, looking at several years of class size analysis, 75% of students in Massachusetts that year had English and math core courses that were 21 students or less. So again, our averages are pretty average. And so looking at some of our other electives, you can see that there are certainly numbers that are lower that we're monitoring. Generally speaking, we don't run a course section if the enrollment's under 10, unless we are trying to drum up interest, trying to build it, piloting it, what have you. If things trend in the other direction, we monitor that over the time. And every year we're making strategic decisions about how to allocate our personnel to best match course selections. With that being said, happy to answer any questions that you might have.
If I may, Madam Chair, Dr. Galligan did some updates to this document today for us, and I didn't shift them over to the document that you have in front of you.
Sorry
So
about
there
that.
are some details here that I'm going to share his instead right now, if I may, with the committee, just so you have it. So you can see some of the changes, in particular things like computer science, for example, which are now here. So.
I would say also, just of note.
Can I say that again? Sorry, Tim. Can you go back down?
Yep.
Thanks.
Those are the big changes, right?
Yep,
And
that's it.
wellness,
There's
yeah.
only a few. Yep, just to account for some of those elective offerings.
Did you have a question, Kate, or you just wanted to see that?
No, I just
Okay.
wanted to see those numbers.
We will add that to our packet later, just so we do have that update.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or discussion with Dr. Galligan around this presentation?
I guess I'm just wondering if there's anything you have your eye on that is of concern, or if you just feel like you're saying it's on trend and follows a certain pattern with.
Yeah, it does. I think anytime, I think we take that into account with the budgetary discussions that are potentially coming up that Superintendent Luff mentioned. So I think I'd respectfully request to wait on that answer if possible. But yes, always, right? You're always being strategic about what you're monitoring. You're monitoring enrollment trends in classes, in programs, and then you might allocate your resources differently or create something different to drum up more interest, right? And our total enrollment has been pretty stable in terms of total number of students in the high school for a long time. So with that, your total number of sections, more or less, are going to be the same. I also note one other interesting thing that class size averages tell part of a story. They do not tell the whole story. There are other metrics that are used, right? Student to teacher ratio, right, is one that is different but kind of complementary to class size averages. So if you look at Norwood High School's student to teacher ratio, like last year, and again, this is a raw number of teachers to number of students. You divide one by the other, and that's what you get, right? Slightly higher than the district average, and until very recently, higher than the state average. So it's just another metric that is interesting. But none of them tell the whole story.
And we talked about this for a long time in our budget subcommittee meeting. It was 1/3 of our meeting. And we asked a lot of questions, but a couple things that I thought helpful to know. The schedule is very complex, and I don't want to know how you make it work. But a lot of creativity goes into it. And
Yeah.
there are things like in world language, and there's more than one level, teachers teaching more than one level at a time. And I think, for example, there was a psychology class one time that had college prep and honors.
Correct. Yep.
So then additional work was given for kids who enrolled in honors.
Yep.
So I know there's a lot of
Yep.
combining and creativity happening.
That's a very common way to do that, right? So especially in many of our elective areas, you'll have multiple courses or multiple levels of the same course together in the same room. So these numbers are what you see when you walk in a room. But if you looked at the list of sections, some of them would look much smaller, but you might see 4 of those all combined in one room together, right? So this is kind of the most true way to present it, I guess.
Which, just for the public, is not something you can do in the lower grades in the same way.
Correct.
Just in case anyone were to take that train of
Yeah.
thought.
And it's important to note, I think, as well, when you see a small class, that's 57 minutes of a day. It's not all day with a small class, right? So it's just one kind of piece of the pie. So.
And the other thing we talked about, which we talk about all the time at our elementary schools, is the physical classroom space, right?
Right.
And at the high school, I believe the building was built to have about 24 to 25 students
That's
max
like a cap,
in,
yeah,
in
yeah.
most classrooms.
Yep, and many classrooms that, like, for example, science labs have a cap on number of lab stations, right? Like, that is a physical limitation to the room and one that has safety ramifications if you go over it, so, yep.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Galligan.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And before I let Dr. Fexik go, I'm going to do the elementary one quickly, just so you can see that, and then I'll have her do her enrollment analysis, and then she can lead right into the middle school schedule, if
Yeah.
that works.
That'd be great.
So the elementary analysis, which I will share here, is essentially a projected class size for next year based on the four grade levels at each school that we'll have. And as you can see, the Balch, for example, broken down, again, number of students broken down by number of sections, and the overall average class size for each. You'll see they run anywhere from typically 17 again to 23 in these schools. Grade 1 at Balch, 16.6, grade 2, 21, 3, 21.6, grade 4, 22.3. Callahan, 21, 20, 17.6, and 23. Cleveland, 18.6, 20, 20, and 20.1. Cleveland lost a teacher because they had an interventionist that was in place of a teacher that has gone back to an interventionist, so that's why you see a reduction in one of those. Oldham, we do have lower class size and a few, being 16, 19 and a half, 16, and 17.3. Prescott, 18.3, 20.6, 18, and 20. And then Willett in general is 21.7, and then the PACS program, which is there, which is small right now, but is growing. So these are numbers that we're currently looking into next year, and that we have budgeted for in next year's fiscal year budget, 26. And you see these regularly. I've also added to this memo the current kind of enrollment based on what you get each month, but for your review. But I'll take any questions on the projected 25-26 elementary grids, knowing that in the following year, this will change again based on projections for the scenario 1 that you chose for redistricting.
Any questions on the grid?
That's this is this year.
This is projected for next year. So with Dr. Fexik and with these ones, these are projected for next year based on what we're looking at for the budget. Dr. Galligan can't project next year's because he's this process of December all the way through May or so, where kids will sign up and for different courses. So his are current.
Doesn't the 5th grade go to the middle school next year?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Yep.
only grades 1 through 4.
This is grades 1 through 4. Which one are you looking at?
Oh, yeah, that's not the right one.
Are you looking at this one, Joan?
I'm looking at whatever was linked in our packet.
It's this one.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong one. That would be why there's a grade 5 on it.
Yeah. The one with grade 5 is the current year's grid.
Okay.
Yeah. The one up that Tim has pulled up is the projections for next year.
Okay, I was trying to follow along in the
Yeah.
packet. Sorry.
Yeah.
So there's the same number of teachers projected to be needed for grade 1 through 4 next year at every building as this year, except for the Cleveland. The Cleveland this year, there's 14 teachers across grades 1 through 4, but as Tim said, that was because this year we reallocated an interventionist, which JJ and Matt had told us about
I got
in
it.
the spring.
Yep.
And that position is going back to an interventionist,
That's correct.
correct?
Yep. So if you look at the memo, the enrollment analysis is the 2025 picture based on the transition model, and then at the end I added the current one at a member's request to make sure you had the current enrollment grids just so you had them to review.
Okay.
And I know I asked you this question in the budget sub, but out of these projected classes, is there any grade or school that you currently have your eye on, depending on how enrollment changes between now and the fall?
Yes, there's some higher class sizes at the Callahan that we're looking at, and we know there's some lower class sizes at the Oldham. So those will obviously change and as time goes on, but so we'll consider any modifications we have to make as enrollments change, and we really won't know that for a while, so even into next school year.
Any further questions?
Mm-mm.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Okay. So, next up is the middle school, and Dr. Frechik, if you want to come on up. This particular analysis obviously is a projected class size for Coakley, opening a new 5th grade class. Number of electives are based on a trimester 4-team schedule that she will review in her presentation later, with approximately 287 incoming 5th graders. The class sizes and elective offerings assume both the 12 general education teachers that are already coming from elementary and have already been worked through, as well as some staff that have been included in our FY26 budget request. So I will open that up. And I have the wrong, oh, I do, that's right. Yep, phew, oh, good.
Of course I did.
And so, Margo, take it away.
So the first one is the easiest one because our 5th grade classes will be platoon. That's what we call it in Aspen. It means they will travel together as a little pack. So just like they do now as 5th graders. Mr. Downs' homeroom, I always go with Mr. Downs because I have one. I'm getting one, so I know it's the right teacher name. Mr. Downs' classroom will go to wellness together, to art, to music, to all their things together. So essentially every single class for grade 5 will be a class of 24 students. That's how that one works. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more later on about what 5th grade will actually be taking. So then grade 6 varies a little bit more because we mix them up as they leave. So their core subject classes, science, social studies, ELA, and math, 12 teachers. So they average 22 students per class in grade 6 for their core subjects. With wellness, what I did was I looked at the current number of sections that we had. I very conservatively only added 1, knowing that we are adding teachers predominantly for grade 5, but it will relieve some of our other places along the way as well. So as you can see, most of our classes average 19. Art, we know will, even with adding an art teacher, will still be a little bit higher than the others. Music is always going to be different because it's based on choice. Students can choose band, chorus, or orchestra in grade 6. And no, we don't put all of the band students. We tried that once, 82 band students in a room. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. I mean, it was a thing, but it's not a thing. So we do multiple sections of band, but we kind of, that varies slightly depending on how many band, how many chorus, how many orchestra. So that one changes, but generally speaking, it's 19 to 21 for our specialists. Grade 7. Again, similar. These are just the 272 divided by 12. You get 23 on average for most things. Same, looked at kind of the number of that we have right now. Now, one thing that changes is that we're moving STEM and computers to be half a trimester piece to make sure that students still get all of the different specials that we want them to have, even with the trimester method. So they are losing a few classes, but their numbers in those classes are going down quite a bit, which is fantastic. Like right now I sit about 24, even up to like 27 in STEM, which is not optimal. And right now we sit at 29 in computers and are not able to offer computers to all of our 7th graders because they don't have enough seats. Kind of similar to what Dr. Galligan said, if I don't have a computer station for them, I can't put them in a computers class. So this model means that not only will we have seats for every single student in computers and STEM, there'll actually be less of them. And if you can imagine 12-year-olds running around with saws and hammers and things of that nature in STEM, not computers, no saws and well, actually that's not really true, but they build things in the computer class too. But these are very active hands-on classes where kids do a lot of activities, so smaller numbers is certainly better both for safety management and just their overall experience in the program. All of our seats in the new school, all of the classrooms in the new school are designed for 24 students, just so you know that. And I think everything else is about the same. Music, we have a few more sections because we also offer general music in grade 7, so students then can choose between general music, band, chorus, and orchestra. 8th grade, Little bit different because now world language goes to every single day, so it's another core subject. So, but with fewer teachers, so that's why those numbers are a little bit bigger. Adding the world language teacher that we've requested in the new budget will help lower those numbers. Right now, world language sits at 27 or 28 in a classroom for grade 8, just because I have 5 teachers and 270 students. But the core subjects stay around that 22. Wellness, STEM, STEM and computers, again, doing that half trimester, those numbers are able to stay a lot lower than they currently are. World language even comes down a little bit, kind of sits right at our 24 students in a classroom. Music is the one that varies the most because it is now an elective, so students can choose to take band, chorus, and orchestra, but they are not required to. And then art, again, always a little bit higher just because of the fewer number of art teachers and the number of sections. So that is us in a snapshot.
And again, this is based on the additions that we have in the preliminary FY26 budget.
Are there any questions on this grid? Okay, so I think we're going to move Dr. Frazek's second presentation up so she doesn't have to hang out with us for too much longer. So further down on the agenda under new business was an update on the structures and scheduling. So Dr. Frazek and Dr. Muniz, if you'd like to give us that overview.
Sure. So we're going to take a look predominantly at the 5th grade schedule. The 6th, 7th, and 8th grade schedule is not changing significantly except for 2 pieces. And the number one piece is moving to trimesters. So the reason that we chose to move to trimesters is one is across the 4 grades to be able to make sure that students are still experiencing all the same specials that they currently have. And being able to provide the same experience, and then adding in grade 5, the original hope was to add STEM and world language. With the additions that we've requested, we focused on world language to being added in. The second piece is that a quarter or semester system is a really short period of time. So a quarter is 8 weeks. About a month in, you're doing a progress report, and then another 4 weeks. So we feel that you can actually provide a little bit better information about a student when you're doing it 6 weeks and 12 weeks in terms of grading, assessment, and providing that kind of information. It often feels at the end of September that you barely know your students and you're trying to do a progress report for them. You don't have a lot in there. So just kind of divides it up a little bit in terms of what we're doing. And then it also allows for those 2 different schedule models because 5th and 6th grade will be looking a little bit different than 7th and 8th grade, which I can talk about. So we'll still be on a 6-day rotation just like we are now. So if I'm looking at grade 5, they will have 3 days of wellness a week. Just a reminder that wellness is a mix of health and gym. And they would do 2 sessions of gym and 1 of health. Currently, I know they do health and they do gym. I think they're more fully separated at the elementary level, but this is the model that we use for all 3 grade levels, which is very similar. So 2 days of physical activity and 1 day of doing health activities. World language will be every other day, because we know that that's what works best for kids and matches what we're able to offer at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Art, and then so if you look at art, music, and library, they get 2 sessions per cycle. So you get art 2 times a 6-day cycle, music 2 times a 6-day cycle, and then library 2 times a 6-day cycle, which is either the same or more than what they currently get at the elementary level.
Will 6th grade get library?
Will 6th grade get library? No, we don't have that scheduled in. 6th grade usually goes to the library via their ELA class. So this is just our bell schedule. One change that we've made is currently Mustang Block is at the end of the day, and the most exciting part of the schedule is I have 2 lunches. Not 3, just 2. I have 4 lunch times. Don't get me wrong. I have 4 lunch times. But in terms of actually scheduling and not having overlapping classes and trying to figure out where people are supposed to be, either you go to lunch from 11:30 to 12, or you go to lunch from 12:10 to 12:40, leaving a nice Mustang block 40-minute period for all grades, just like they have now. That time is used for kind of like a win period, a what I need period. We do our character strong during that time. We use it for team building activities. Students get a start on homework. We do reading, lots of different things that are done during Mustang block. And then the other classes I think stay the same and currently how they look. We just kind of moved it around a bit. And then so a bell schedule. So if you're kind of thinking, this is just 5th grade. So 5th grade obviously is our new one. They look a little bit different. They stay all together. So we have our 4-teacher team. So 1 teacher would teach math, 1 science, 1 writing, and 1 reading. All teachers will be teaching social studies this first year because we're getting them all trained in social studies. So that way they will have that fluidity of what we're teaching. So if I am a student and my homeroom is the math teacher, I might have science going to teacher 2, first block. And then I'll go to my special. And then I would go back to my homeroom teacher for math, go to lunch, have Mustang block with my math teacher, where we might do some social studies or character strong during that time, because social studies, the one thing that 5th grade does differently than what we do is they do writing, reading, math, science, and social studies. So one of the things that we're working on is where do we fit all of those things into the schedule that we have them. So right now we've placed social studies kind of in that 40-minute Mustang block area. And then I would go to my reading teacher and then my writing teacher and then have my special at the end of the day. One thing that was really important was making sure that all of our 5th grade teachers have common planning time together. So their block at, like right now, and this is just a model, we are still very much in the really, really fun part of trying to put this all into Aspen and making it work. It's great. But one of their blocks, all 5th grade teachers will have off so that they can have common planning time, just like my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers do right now. And then the second specials would be a teacher's prep.
And Dr. Brady, do all the kids go together to these?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so if I am in, I'm going to keep using Mr. Downs. I'm sorry, Mr. Downs. It's just the one I remember off the top of my head. So if I'm in Mr. Downs' homeroom and he's teaching, he's the math teacher, then I'm starting with him in the morning for homeroom, going to my other team teachers, which are literally right next door. It's so nice. They're going to walk out. There's going to be like a little area, and then they walk right back into their other classroom. And then they will travel as a cohort. So all of Mr. Downs' homeroom will go to science block 1, then have the same special, then go back to Mr. Downs for math, then go back and stay with Mr. Downs, go to lunch together, obviously, and then go to the same reading class together and the same writing class together, and then their same final special.
And Dr. Munoz, that's similar to what happens in 5th grade now.
Yeah, currently in elementary schools, they move as a platoon is what we call it in Aspen. So the kids would pick up all their books, all the kids go to the same next class. But some teachers, because we don't have enough classes to teach all the subjects, would have to teach, like you said, everyone teaches social studies. Like one school would teach writing and social studies, but then they have other content areas where they would shift.
It's different at each school, though.
It is.
Right?
It is
because,
different.
like, at the Callahan, there's only 2 teachers.
Right, so-
and
but
Mr.
there's-
Downs is the math teacher at Callahan.
Yeah.
I know that. Not to pick on him, but I know that because he was my daughter's teacher many years ago.
Yeah.
Officially
And then
apologize.
But they
Yeah.
still shift as a platoon. They don't like go
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to go to this teacher and you're going to go to that teacher and we're in the same homeroom. No,
But are any of the schools currently still all in one class? Like Oldham was at one point. Are they still?
They switched this year.
They switched this year.
Yeah, all 5th grade.
All
I
fifth
think
graders
they
this year
all
are
switch
switching
either
this
between
semester.
2 teachers or 3 teachers, and is there one that does 4?
'Cause it's
No.
like
There was at
middle
least one that
school
did switch between 3.
Cleveland is right.
But
It's
this
like
is-
middle school light in
Yeah,
element in
middle
5th
school
grade.
light.
It's middle school light, right? Like
That's
So
a
this-
very nice way. It's mini middle school.
yeah.
So
Gets
this
still
transition
moving.
up is really, will ease the transition for kids going into the 5th grade and
Yeah.
the middle school model.
Dr. Fraser, is there any discussion of having the 6th graders stay platooned? Like, we've talked, I think there's somewhat of an expectation that the younger grades are going to have a little bit of a different experience, age appropriate. And I know right now the 6th graders, as mine does, is not platooned.
Right.
But was there a discussion about that? What's happening? And just if you could.
We've talked about it a little bit. We have not explored it as much as we have like with fifth grade, in particular around specials, because having them travel together to go, again, that kind of going in and off team, that's what we've kind of toyed with the idea of. We have not made a decision on that as of yet. The harder part of that is, in particular, so world language adds a big mix, and music adds a big difficulty for that. So even with this model, for world language, I have to determine which homerooms are going to have kids that take French, which are going to have kids that don't take French. It's really French or don't take French. Make sure I have enough going to French at the same time so I can pull the kids from French into the French room and put the kids from Spanish into the Spanish room, and something very simple for music. So that's the difficulty of doing it. It's pretty easy to platoon on the team. It's pretty difficult to platoon off the team.
Because they'll be in the same lunch together. They're on two different, it'll be 5th and then 6th on different floors, but they share some space commonly. And I just
Not at the same time.
Oh,
So
they have-
no, so
those
fifth
are the two
grade.
lunches?
Yeah, even just like right now, like sixth grade goes to lunch with sixth grade, seventh grade, seventh and eighth.
Okay.
We do not have mixed lunches now, and we will
won't
not
be
have them
mixed.
next year. So there
Okay.
are 2 lunchrooms. So fifth grade and 7th grade will have lunch at the same time, one on the first floor, one on the 3rd floor, if I'm remembering my schematics correctly, and then 6th and 8th. So they
Oh,
won't.
okay.
Francis, sorry, 1 second. I just have to confirm we still have a quorum, or we have to stop. David, are you still online?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Proceed, because if we didn't, we lost our quorum, and then we need a bus. Sorry, proceed.
Okay, so it's in discussion about the 6th grade, like if there's opportunities
Yeah.
to look at it differently with the younger ones coming in and how.
Yeah.
that
And
will
even
work.
if we don't end up doing it next year, because I'm not going to pretend like creating this whole new schedule is not absorbing every moment of my day, it's something that I think once we see the 5th grade and how it works, even doing it
You
a
might
year down the
adapt.
road and say
Okay.
like, you know what, this actually did really work, we really liked it with the 5th grade, let's see if we can adapt it, because we would like it to be a bit of a transition. Like in my perfect world where I can just make children go wherever I want them to go in the magical Aspen, I would have them all platooned in grade 5 and then probably platooned off teams for grade 6, but switching on team because they're literally not going anywhere. They're just kind of in and out. So they get a little bit of mixing, but a little bit of not mixing. And then 7th and 8th grade, it's you're mixing because that's the plan. So
Thanks.
On that note, I mean, I
I'm
think
really
what
hoping
Kate
John
is-
Greeley is not watching any of this right now.
I think what Kate was getting at is when we promoted the 5 through 8 model, and in our ed plan and our visioning, we talked a lot about a lower and upper middle
Yes.
school, and we talked a lot, and I think Kate's hearing from community members, I'm hearing community members of, okay, great, how are we now changing that 6th grade to that lower model that we told them we were gonna have? So all of
So-
those are things you're exploring?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Those things we're exploring. I think the bigger piece was having younger kids with younger kids. I think the biggest downside of the middle school that I'm in right now is that I cannot effectively keep my 6th graders separated from my 7th and 8th graders because I have a 6th grade classroom, an 8th grade classroom, a 7th grade classroom, a 7th grade classroom, all on the same floor. And even as much as we have like, okay, this is our 6th grade wing over here, but all of my 8th graders must go through my 6th grade wing to get to the classes on the other side. Even though all of my 8th grade classes are upstairs, so are some of my 7th grade and my 1 6th grade because I have to have a science room over there. So a huge part of what we talked about was the physical geographical locations. And 6th grade will be on a 6th grade floor that is 95% 6th grade with a art wing. I think it's art wing down at this end that has a direct staircase. So if I'm a 7th grader, I'm going right there, I'm going to art, and then I'm going back up. And there's no need for me to be going this way.
Just the facilities alone allow the 5th and 6th grade almost to be at their,
Right.
a lower school almost, you know what I mean? It's just the structure.
And that's what we're working towards, and I think some of it is the staffing, and my specialist staff still has to be shared. Our vision is that eventually they really can have their own staff, so then it really does become more of a lower school and an upper school. Because if I have full staffing that only has to be used for 5th and 6th grade, it makes it much easier to platoon all those groups and put all those things
Right.
together, as opposed to I'm trying to figure out how do I take 6 world language teachers and split them when I have these needs right now. I have 5 right now, and they teach full schedules, so I'm just adding 1. And how do I kind of make that work?
Yeah.
So some of it is a scheduling piece, but I think the biggest change that we will see is the geographic location, which you can see in other schools that do 5 to 8 and 6 to 8.
About the educational plan, right, to look at a lower school kind of idea. It was a long time ago too. I was just gonna say it's been a long build, and I've said it's almost there. And I know Dr. Vegas has been working on that. Like, how do you get there? So obviously the 5th grade is somewhat a lower school. The 6th grade by location is somewhat a lower school, and even if it doesn't work next year, as you said, it's something that we can still consider trying to get there. Based on the numbers.
Right, I'm sure that's with everything, right? You're gonna be adapting. Thanks. And geographically, there's 2 cafeterias.
There are
which is
2
why you're having 2
physical
lunch
cafeterias,
periods. So
yes.
grade 5 and 6 share a cafeteria, 7 and 8. And I don't know how you're structuring it, but like grade 5 and 7 will be at lunch in separate cafeterias at the same time. And then
Correct.
6 and 8, same time, separate cafeterias.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Unless you have wandering students.
But I can see where they all are in this new building. It's going to be amazing. You can like stand at one end and like nobody can go anywhere. It's pretty phenomenal.
So
It's honestly, it's a building designed to be a middle school in a middle school model, and I think that is the biggest difference. Like, it is literally designed by people who thought about children and not containing smaller humans in little boxes, which I think in 1973 was more the model of how you designed a school.
Right.
I'm assuming.
70s, 80s parenting.
It was a whole thing. So
It was a whole thing.
It is. This building has truly been designed by people who think about, talk to, and listen to the educators that are running the building, and designed it for us.
Before we move on from this, can I just tie it back to the budget for a moment? So those FTEs that we have included in the preliminary budget that we have said we need, I think it's really important the full committee understands and then give us some guidance before we go back to subcommittee tomorrow and the BBC next week. Because if we don't keep that addition of 1 world language, and correct me if I'm wrong with anything I'm saying, Margot, but if we don't keep the 1 FTE for world language, we cannot offer world language at grade 5.
Correct.
If we do not keep the 1 additional music, then grade 5 will only have access to general education music, not all of the ensembles.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And if we don't
And
add
they
an
might.
additional...
Can I honestly say?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I would we would have to pull people from the elementaries if you don't give me a 3rd. If
Yeah.
I am not provided with a 3rd music teacher, we would be pulling from the elementaries in order to provide that service.
That service, okay. And then if we don't add an additional art, then we would either reduce the number of art classes or the class sizes would go up,
It would probably be both.
both. And if we don't add an additional wellness, same thing. We'll
Yes.
either reduce the number of classes or class
Yes.
size will go up.
Yeah.
So if you remember what we were saying earlier when BBC said, we will support you going up to 5 FTEs, right there's 4. And if we don't get those 4 in, there's major impacts to this programming and scheduling and our ed plan.
I could not agree more.
Sorry, proceed.
Did I have any other slides? I'm hoping
No.
that's the last one. Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure who was moving them forward.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Other
Thank
questions?
you. No, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Brady. I think that was it on the enrollments, but we still had more of the cost centers, right?
Mr. Mannion, talk about the fees, if I can get that one up here again. It's here, I promise. Okay. All right, so just quickly on the fee analysis, we'll start there. I just want to share that, whenever we're looking at any budgets, it's always prudent to look at the revenue that we get. There is no final absolute request here to make recommendations on increases of fees or anything like that. Mr. Mannion will outline what fees we currently received, the revenue we received from those, and actually make some, give you some ideas of if those were increased, what that might do for the budget, right? It does not mean that we're asking you tonight to raise fees. I want to be clear on that, but it is just kind of an analysis of the revenue that we get and what may happen if they were raised. And I know there's some questions about, hey, were there conversations about reducing fees at one time? So it can go either way. It's just a matter of knowing that this is a prudent way to look at any revenue in a way to either reduce or what would need to increase the budget if they were not there. So, Mr. Mannion, I will pop this up for you here. Good to go.
Okay, so that sets the framework, and just to build on that, we'll mention that the budget that you've seen so far does not have any fee increases in it. We've just assumed the current fee levels going forward, but this will be an overview of the various types of fees, and you'll get some detail on the different fees and some potential scenarios if we're looking to increase them, some background information and some potential ranges that we could use. These are the fees we'll be looking at tonight: the transportation fee, athletics, fine arts, preschool tuition, building use, rental, and Chromebook insurance. Transportation, so we have a transportation fee. It's all grade levels are on the yellow school buses, the regular transportation. The basic fee structure right now is that there's a primary fee of $275 per student. So at the kindergarten level currently, there's no cost. They're transported to their neighborhood elementary school first, and then they hop on the shuttle to Willett. No charge at all for the kindergarten students currently. Grades 1 through 6, this is state law. If they're over 2 miles from their school, they don't have the $275 fee, but we do charge a $25 registration fee just to cover the administrative aspects of it in the passes that we print. Grades 1 to 6 under 2 miles, it's the fee of $275. Grades 7 through 12, which aren't covered by that state law, it's the $275. And then we have a late registration of an additional $25. So if you register after our official registration date, instead of $275, you pay $300. So it's sort of there's an incentive to register early, which helps us build our routes. There's a family cap here of $700, which is a little less than 3 fees. So, if a family has multiple children, they could potentially hit the cap. And we do except we award financial waivers for families that qualify as low income. Currently, we collect about $200,000, and that covers about 19% of the yellow bus contract. So some potential increases for next year. This is an area that's increasing by up to 20%. So if we go to the highest possible increase, we could increase by up to $75, going up to $350 for the primary fee. We could increase that late registration to kind of give more incentive to early registration. So I think that's a good thing to think about. Instead of only $25, make it a little bit more of an incentive to register early. So we could increase that to $50. And potentially we could increase the registration fee. That does hit low-income families as well, because we do always ask for the registration fee. So perhaps we go up, modest amount on the registration fee as well. We could go, these are just ranges. Again, we're not recommending anything at the moment.
What would the fee, just curious, Mr. Mannion, if you went up to $350, what would the revenue increase be in something like that? Did you calculate that?
I'll show that on the last slide. All these, you'll see a summary at the very end that will show all of the revenue, what these potential revenue assumptions would look like.
Kate?
Yeah.
Thanks. Mr. Mannion and Mr. Leff may not have this, but do we know why kindergarten is not charged a fee?
I believe it has to do with the shuttle and the fact that all the kindergartners are at Willett right now, because they're transported to, I think it had to do with when the kindergarten went to one school
That was
potentially.
way before me. That
Yeah.
was way before even my kid who's a senior. So that was like 23 years ago, I think.
Do you know,
maybe even
Jody?
longer than that. I think it was
I'm just curious how we got to kindergartners not having a bus fee necessarily. Why that's, like, what the reasoning
I
was.
think it goes way back. I don't ever remember when the fees went in that kindergarten is ever charged.
Right, okay.
Because a lot of times, before they went to full day, they were half day. So they
Oh.
were transported, they were picked up at their door and dropped at their door.
I guess
That
I'd be
goes way
curious
back.
what,
Different time, huh?
That goes to show you.
I think maybe
Do you have
because,
maybe in the
because
last
the
slide?
kindergarten's in one school right now, they all have to go, again, like middle school is our highest transportation because it's on the edge of town and similar with kindergarten, but these
Yeah.
are the youngest students, so I always assumed it was because it's a little complicated because they have to switch buses, it's not ideal, that's a lot for a kindergartner, so we're not gonna charge the full fee for them. But I will say, in 2 years, when
things don't-
kindergarten goes back to the elementary schools, at that point, I would see no reason to not charge again, because they'll basically just be getting on one bus like all of grades 1 through 4. So, not next year, but the year after, potentially it'd be a good year to look at charging kindergarten
Yeah,
again.
and I would recommend that. I mean, I think if you have kids that are using the buses, right, and where transportation fees are going up due to that use, then it would be a reasonable thing to charge somebody a fee for that. You know, I'm not sure the history, but we could certainly try to find that out. I'd probably go to Jody. I already know that's not, I'll find somebody else.
I wonder if some of it was
No,
with the
she-
neighborhood, like, so some kids in kindergarten get on the bus takes them to their elementary school, and then they go to the Willet, but most kids, I think, in kindergarten, they get dropped off or
At
walked
the
to their
elementary.
neighborhood school,
Mhm.
and then get on the bus to the Willet, and that was the decision that the district made. So I think, at the time, since the district was deciding we're pulling you out of your neighborhood school and we're sending you to the Willet, that they didn't feel comfortable with then just saying to families, well, we're making you go to the Willet, and now we're gonna charge you. I think that's where it
Okay.
originated.
I'm just curious how much that would add to, if that, but maybe you don't have that
We can
today.
look into that
Yeah.
for
How do
when we,
you
for the
want this
next time.
discussion structured? Do you want us to give our feedback on each slide, or do you want us to wait till the end and then?
What do you prefer, Sean?
Why don't we get through the slides, because the end will show a summary of it all, and then we talk about it.
You'll be first, Joan.
Yeah.
What?
I'll come back to you first.
I thought.
Okay, so athletics, so of course, these are for participation in sports. We do charge at the middle school and high school level. The current fee structure is $100 per student per season. Usually there's 3 seasons for the middle school, $200 per student per season at the high school. There, again, there's a family cap. These family caps for transportation athletics, they don't like speak to each other. This is just like an athletics family cap, right? Financial waivers are granted for families that qualify as low income. I should say, we're having a task force looking at the waiver process, so I'm working with a whole bunch of these stakeholders, and we're gonna try to have like a uniform waiver method, so that if somebody applies for it in transportation in the beginning of the year and gets accepted, then later in the year on athletics, they won't need to do it again. We'll just see a field checked off. Right now, it's all separately held in those offices.
So their families are filling out the low-income waiver multiple times?
Well, there's different standards in the different offices, so they're not really, yeah, essentially they are doing it. So that'll be an improvement for next year.
Okay.
The current revenue on the athletics is $140,000 per year, and that covers about 15% of the cost for the extracurricular athletics, middle and high school. One potential increase here is looking at a percent, perhaps up to 10%, so it would go from 100 to 110 and from 200 to 220. Something to think about in future years is sometimes these fees, like with the transportation, they go many years and then a big increase, which I think with transportation makes sense because transportation's going up a lot next year. But at some point, maybe we just talk about, a regular increase of 3% every year on the fees, and we bring that to you,
And you would have to vote on that each year, but at least you have an idea of what that, recommendation would be each year coming to you.
All right, so fine arts, this is high school only. We just charge $150 per student. It's a one-time fee for all of that year's participation in any sort of fine arts extracurricular. So you can participate in multiple of those groups, and you're only hit one time with the $150 fee. Not like sports where you have to pay for each sport. There's really no family cap in the fine arts. We do financial waivers. The revenue here is about $40,000, and it does cover about 21% of the cost on the fine arts groups. Again, we were saying, you know, we could consider some sort of increase. It could be a percentage, maybe up to 10%, which would go from 150 to 165. Preschool, of course, is its own whole different sort of thing. This is primarily, you know, preschool is for special education, and we don't charge any tuition for the special education students, but in that model, you have peer model students that are required, and there's available spots, and we do charge tuition for that. And it really varies on the length of the day. There's half day and full day, and it also varies depending on the number of days per week. So there's a lot of options with the preschool. There's really no family cap because these are sort of like paid people, you know, paid students and families using it. And there's really, we're not doing financial waivers right now for the peer model spots. The revenue's about $300,000 per year, and it covers about 19% of the total preschool program. Preschool's interesting because in most school districts, it's got up to 3 funding sources. You always usually have your operating budget. There's usually some grants like IDEA, and there's also an IDEA early childhood grant that's federal. And then you usually have a tuition revolving fund. So there's 3 different sources that fund with the preschool. And they've already sort of reached out to parents for next year. So at this point, we're not really suggesting any increase, you know, for next year. But in future years, again, maybe we think about some sort of schedule of a percentage increase between 3 and 10%, you know, or 5, you know.
We're going to do a deep dive into this model,
Yeah.
the whole 9 yards, the calendar we can do to ensure that we have, you know, the spots filled, and then we're getting as much revenue as we can at the same time, providing good services.
Potential to increase the revenue just by filling all of the spots there too, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Building use, again, is a very unique, it's different than all of these other ones. These are rental rates. They have a very, you know, worked out policy. It's got different tiers. They charge a rental rate per hour on the tiers, and they charge an overtime rate for the custodians. So every time these events run, usually a custodian is working overtime to address safety concerns, but also to clean up. So Tier 1 is school and town departments and nonprofit parent groups. Tier 2 is Norwood community groups that are basically 100% Norwood residents. And then Tier 3, which is the most expensive of them, are all other groups and organizations. The revenue is $138,000. This covers costs for equipment and repairs in the school building. So I wouldn't really use a percentage, but like I would say, they purchase like a new soundboard for the auditorium, or they purchase new hoops at the basketball, you know. So it does purchase things that we would normally would hit our operating budget. So it, you know, it helps the school district in that way, you know, paying for these pieces of equipment and things that break down as they go. I've heard that there was sort of an agreement that we would do an increase of 3% on this. I know we didn't this year because I think with a lot of transitions happening last year, no rates were really proposed. So we would recommend, you know, do a 3% increase. And the overtime rate is an average of the custodial contract. So we know the contract for next year, and we could put that rate in front of you as well.
Makes sense.
And lastly, this is Chromebook insurance. So this is a small fee at the middle and high school. This is a voluntary fee if a family wants to pay for some insurance. And basically, if it's not a warranty repair and the Chromebook gets broken, this pays basically for the full price of the first repair and some of the cost of the second repair, but not the additional repairs. If the family doesn't get this insurance, they just have to pay full cost for the repair. So this is really just something for the families. Whatever we budget there, it basically, I've talked to Mr. Kidd, it basically covers the repairs. We could consider increasing this, but he said we don't really need an increase for next year. We could keep it at the $30. It could go up, you know, eventually we could see this going up to $35 or something like that. So this is a chart that sort of shows all of those costs and those percents. You can see if all of these potential increases that we discussed went in, we would increase our revenue by $82,000. The projected revenue, oh, the costs are going up by 400,000. So the costs are going up higher than the projected increase in the revenue. The most, out of all those categories, the most, highest increase we showed was for transportation, which we would net about $58,000. I will say on the transportation line, because it's going up and we're adding buses, if we increase at those rates, we keep the portion of transportation paid by the fee at that 19% level. You can see with some of the other ones, like athletics, if we do that 10%, we're actually covering a little bit more of it. It's going up to 16% of the cost. With fine arts, it's going up to 23%. So maybe 10% is a little high. And then preschool tuition, also it's covering, we're not really recommending an increase on that one, so it's going a little lower. And the other two basically cover the full cost of things. So I know it's a lot of information, but happy to go back and discuss any one of those individually, or,
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ranian.
if you have any questions.
Joan?
Do you know when the last time these rates were raised for any of them?
I've done some research on that. I think the athletics and the fine arts go back a ways.
Yeah, we've never raised those since I've been on the committee.
No, yeah, it's been.
The transportation may be 5-6 years. The building use, I think, was increased,
2 years.
not this year, but
Yeah.
it was increased at least 3%,
Yeah.
2 years ago.
July 1 of 23.
The Chromebook is small. The preschool tuition, I'm not sure on that one.
2019.
What's that?
2019.
Yeah, a long time.
So that's been a while on that one.
Yeah.
I'm very against raising transportation fees. Where the Coakley is situated, I would be fine with raising transportation fees to the high school, but where the Coakley's, and elementary schools are lit, but where the Coakley is situated, it's impossible for parents to drive their kids there. And transportation to school is not a luxury, it's a necessity, especially for a lot of folks who have two working families. So I'm gonna be against any transportation increases except potentially kindergarten, just because there is nothing right now. And so that would be one thing.
Would you be open to, increasing that late charge? Because we're really
Yes.
concerned with being able to get routes and trying to change
Yes.
this, culture of people signing up late. So we're
Yes.
thinking if we can increase that at the least, try to get people more incentive to sign up earlier.
Yes, no problem with increasing late fees as long as we publicize and people have a chance. But I think given how hard it is to get to some of our schools and the necessity of bus transportation for a lot of our families, that just doesn't feel good. I'm also very curious as to if you've looked at matching fine arts to athletics. So we have fine arts seems like it runs on a similar schedule in that there's the summer musical, the fall, there's each show is a distinct thing. We pay stipends to different people to run each show. So I'm curious as to why that's one across for everything, whereas for athletics, it's 3 separate fees. So that would be another area that I'd be interested in kind of looking to have some equity there between the two groups.
I think we could look at also some comparable districts on that, but I know the concerns, I think, are participation. Charging more on fine arts might affect participation.
I imagine that it affects participation for athletics too. So notice I didn't say that we needed to increase fine arts. I said we just would like to have parity between the two. So if you can figure out a way to lower athletics, great.
Joan, we did talk about that with fine arts, and before Ms. Sheridan resigned, we were supposed to dive into a fine arts analysis because, to your point, why is athletics per season, but fine arts is just one time no matter how much and
Yeah.
how long you do it. There's also different people will tell you different things on if that fee was supposed to be charged at the Coakley or only the high school. It was charged at the Coakley one time. And then fine arts gets really complicated at the high school because certain groups like the madrigals, that's also a class during the day. So they take a class during the day and then also do the after-school activity. But if it's a class, should you really be charging a fee? There's layered stuff mixed into fine arts that I really do think we have to figure out.
To me, it's very simple. If we pay a stipend for somebody to run it, we can charge a revolving fee for it. right? I mean, because that's the argument for charging that revolving fee.
I don't think it's well understood. I think this is a sort of a separate issue, but it goes to the idea of doing an analysis, because where you're going, I think there's going to be a big jump for parents, because I've have some anecdotal experience of people doing fine arts activities and not even expecting a fee, like being surprised by, not communicated to about fees. So I think if there was a really drastic upshoot, that would be an issue with maybe participation or just like pushback. So maybe an analysis is due.
One thing that I didn't see on here that I have seen in the past in revolving funds is ticket prices. Do we charge ticket prices for athletic events or
Yeah.
for fine arts? Like I
Yep.
recall seeing a revolving
We
fund
do.
for that, but don't see that here.
The revolving funds, there's actually a drama revolving fund and a music revolving fund, and the fee goes into those. And there also are gate receipts also in athletics,
Yep.
which is typical, and donations sometimes too. So the
Yeah.
revolving does have some other revenue streams.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's an area to look at too. Like, I don't remember. Are we charging $5 a ticket? Are we charging $10 a ticket?
I'll have to look into
I
that.
think it's
Yep.
$5 for sporting.
Yeah.
I do not know the answer to that question. We can find out.
We can definitely, yeah.
And again, I think we sometimes pay a teacher, right, to be.
We do. We have ticket sellers in our.
Yeah.
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 So, again, for me, it feels simple in terms of if we're paying a stipend, we should be, and we are charging fees. That should be equal. I'd like to get to a place where we're never charging fees, but that's not going to happen in this budget. So.
Yeah. The other complexity with fine arts, and to a degree athletics, but definitely fine arts, is the support of the PMA, the Parent Music Association, because they fund a lot of the after-school things. It gets a little complicated. I'm not saying we can't do an analysis. I'm saying the reason that it paused with Karen and then never got done was because it was just so layered. I do have Karen's last fee analysis from March 23 that I can, resend to everybody again. And at that time, she was not able to find a fine arts fee in any of the other districts that we looked at. So we had comparables to like extended day at the time and preschool and technology and transportation athletics, but we did not find a comparable for fine arts. But that was 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. I do share Joan's, I already said this in budget
Yeah.
subcommittee, but I'm very uncomfortable with increasing any
Yeah.
fees. It's in direct opposition of what our equity audit told us. And to your point earlier, Joan, our high needs population has only gone up since we had that equity audit. But part of the reason we're having this conversation is because, it is in our purview to look at all aspects of our budget. And as we know, there are potential challenges ahead with our town appropriated operating budget. We need to look at grants, which we will next, and all of our revolving funds. And I hope that on the general government side, they are having this same analysis and conversation of other fees under their jurisdiction. I don't know if they are or not, but I hope they are, because otherwise it makes me even more uncomfortable that we're talking about essentially an additional tax on students and their families to make up a budget deficit.
Well, and I think it's also important to note that as we bring you these tiers later, that if we're, 800,000 is that number, there's going to be something else to give, right? So there's the possibility of this being a tier to consider, which I don't want to do, but I'm listening to the concern of the committee.
What do you mean by tier model?
Well, I'm going to bring you tiers of percentage reductions to try to get to the 1.2 million.
Okay.
Right,
Okay.
so increases in revenues, whether it be fees or grants or other revenue sources, could also be part of it.
Got it. Okay.
Kate or David, do you have any feedback that you want us to consider as we, do further analysis as a subcommittee?
For the fees or for everything, for?
Anything so
Anything at this
far,
point.
like the
Okay.
fees or other budget areas you've heard us talk about? We still will do grants, but.
I guess if there's a point when we were looking at tiers, yeah, we need options, because there might have, I don't know, yeah, I think Tim just covered it in terms of we need to look at cuts, what are the options in different scenarios. because I think that will be where the the discussion, the hard discussion, obviously, would come out in terms of where do you address that? Yeah, I don't have any, just the options. That's what we would need, right?
Right. John?
I appreciate the guidance on what you're hearing tonight. Help us
Yeah.
with that.
Was there additional feedback that you needed on the fee analysis, Mr. Mannion?
No, I don't think so. I think this was helpful.
Okay, the next part is very similar to the presentation you saw earlier this year on grants. What we tried to do here, just, we have entitlement grants from the federal and state governments and competitive grants as revenue. We're trying to project what we'll still have next year, right? All of the competitive grants that are out there may or may not be there. So when we look at the FY26 budget, we're really focusing on the entitlement grants, which we think will be there frequently. So Mr. Manning has put together a presentation here that I will have him share now.
Very similar format to what we've looked at earlier in the year. The big picture is grants. These are the large federal entitlement grants, not the competitive grants. They support about 26.7 FTEs. We're projecting the same in FY26 as in FY25. It's, we won't be really applying for these until later. These federal grants typically have like a 2-year cycle, so we are always spending down the prior year. We're almost always spending 1 year's and jumping into the next year's. And I just mentioned revolving funds, which are primarily the preschool tuition account, which we just discussed, also has 5.8 FTEs. So all in all, there's a little over 30 FTEs that are covered, and we're assuming that in next year, just like in this year, between grants and revolving funds. Just a quick read down, and all of these are federal grants. I know there's a lot going on, and we've mentioned, these are all set by law. So all the title grants and the SPED IDEA 240 grant. The Title I covers 5.9 Title I teachers, as well as some other PD and other things for the Title I schools. We expect this grant to, be funded at a similar level next year and to be able to cover those roughly 6 teaching positions. Title II-A, teacher mentoring, professional development. We expect no real significant change for next year. We're still assuming that grant. Title III, stipends for after-school programming. This is a lot of English language learners. $90,000. We don't really see any significant change for next year. Same with Title IV, which is a lot of professional development and technology stipends and some family engagement. We expect that to be about $35,000. And the largest of our federal entitlement grants, the IDEA, the 240 grant, this does cover about 19.9 FTEs of that roughly 26. Currently, we've got 3 OT, 1 PT, we've got 2.5 facilitators, and almost 13 paras. We did some shifts this year, so the next year we're basically carrying forward the shifts that we did, as well as an admin assistant, some benefits, and some supplies. And then there's also an IDEA early childhood allocation, which covers a 0.9 para at LMPA, and we expect that next year. And lastly, there is a state grant that we're getting, the $104 per day for the shelter students. That we just got, we're kind of on a 1-year lag with that, so we just got our current year reimbursement all the way through December, which was all that was budgeted for this fiscal year in the governor's budget. There's some discussion that they may fund the rest of this year, but we haven't heard yet. And if we carry that forward into next year, we'll have about $140,000 to spend next year that we can use on various things, anything for the families or students that were in the shelters.
That's a big if, though, right?
Yeah, or we could spend that this year. I mean, those are reimbursement based, so we could opt to go ahead and spend that this year, which maybe helps our balance, and we can carry it forward in other types of funds, or use it to prop back up our stabilization. So there's flexibility for these funds to either take them into next year for sort of continuity, or spend this year and use it in the current year. That's really it.
Teresa.
Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Could you speak to the likelihood of interruption? As you know, as we all know, the discussion around what's happening in the country and these federal grants has been a hot topic, and I think that these are laws that belong to Congress and that we are protected in that way, but I wonder if you could say more.
That's correct. Congress is the taxing and spending authority, right? And although the president may make administrative executive orders, that does not mean that they are legal. So, for example, if Congress has developed a law in IDEA that requires the spending of federal funds for students with disabilities in their education, or Title I for intervention services, then those have to be provided. Now, that is not to say that he couldn't put an executive order freezing funds and those kind of things, but they're not legal, and I do not believe that they would impact us over time. The only true impact, I think, that we would find is that if the Congress actually changed the law that did not allow funding for these services anymore. If the Department of Education was abolished, for example, and there was no entity to actually deliver those funds, then they would go out as block grants to the state, and the state would disseminate those funds, because they still have to, by law, be disseminated to the constituents for those services. That is not to say that, we had this question about a federal freeze of whatever, right? A few weeks ago, and it was a question like, well, were we going to get stoppages in payments, or at least for a short period of time? And we got guidance from our attorneys and from the attorney generals that we would still get those funds for the remainder of this year. So I am not as concerned about these funds being reduced unless Congress actually takes action to remove the law or significantly modify the amount they believe should be spent on it. That's where I am. I understand why people are nervous about it. There's no question. But for FY26, I feel pretty comfortable.
And so the block grants would ostensibly get in the way of any interruption in the way we budget. It's ahead enough that we should be okay for them.
Yeah, and the block grant, I mean, that's only if they abolish, if a bill goes to abolish, yeah.
If the department went away.
So in these grants, it's covering 26.7 FTEs, correct?
Yes.
So in worst case scenario, this funding goes away. That is 26.7 FTEs that we would suddenly be left with having to fund or remove.
Fund, I mean, the law doesn't go away.
Yeah.
So if they abolish special education, that would be a very interesting thing for Congress to do, which I would never imagine that would happen, because I believe that many of the folks on Congress, regardless of the side of the table that you're on, have kids that would be impacted by that as well.
And then we would also still have regulations from DESE and the state that we would have, because it's not just us. We don't have a direct line.
No, I understand that.
So there's layers of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is part of why a couple of meetings ago I had asked, and I know we're still working on it, but like really putting together that full all-fund budget picture so people understand like everything. So there's 26.7 FTEs in our school system, in our overall all-funds budget that is reliant on this funding. And even if the federal funding were to go away, there is still the state mandate to deliver those services. Correct?
Some
Yes.
services.
Yes, I mean, the federal law would have to go away first, and the state, the Massachusetts special education law was here before federal special education law, so the state would have to do something as well to remove that. Yeah. I honestly, I tend, and I know it's easy to be nervous about this type of a thing, but I would be very shocked if Congress made any changes to the federal law. The advocacy groups for these particular bills and laws are amazing and support the services that our students with needs have. And I'd get that education, and it'd be wild. I don't see it happening. I don't want anybody to worry and fret over it either, especially the teachers and the parents out there who have kids who are receiving the services.
Sean, do you have the total amount? Is this all equaling about 2.5 million?
Yeah, I didn't sum it up at the bottom.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think
That
it's
seems about right.
I think it's about 2.5.
Yeah.
'Cause Joan,
Keep in
you
mind,
had-
this isn't, you know, in the quarter two, we did show all grants.
Yeah.
Even with like I said, with these federal grants, these are the next year grants, but we'll still be spending down some of our current year grants because of this 27-month cycle. So
Right.
really, if you go back to that quarter two report, you'll see all of the grants, including the competitive, the private, there's a few private grants.
Because I
But-
think, Joan, you had asked like 2 meetings ago, what was the percent of our budget
Mhm.
coming from the federal funds,
Mhm.
right? So what is that percent roughly?
I can look that, I mean, we can bring that back.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so again, we're meeting as a subcommittee tomorrow, budget sub. So if anything comes to mind tonight or tomorrow before, what time are we meeting? 2, 1, sometime in the
I
afternoon.
think it's one.
So if you have any feedback, later tonight or tomorrow morning, send it to Tim, and then we can make sure to look at it. And then we should briefly talk about, and we can take this offline if it's easier, but we really do need to schedule another meeting before we go back to budget balancing, because our protocol has always been that budget balancing or the Finance Commission do not have access or the information that the school committee has not seen. And we do need to bring things back to BBC on February 26th. Tim, were there certain times you were proposing for us to meet?
It's really those 2 days, because those are the only 2 days that we really have to meet
Yeah.
prior to that meeting.
So we are looking at February 24th or February
24th
25th.
or the 25th, yep.
And we're proposing remote, which we do still have the ability to meet fully remote, and just the one agenda item of budget. Do people want me to send out a poll tonight?
I don't have access to my calendar.
Yeah, I can't see my home one.
If I send it out tonight, which I will, as soon as I get home, could I ask everybody to reply by the end of the business day tomorrow, just so we can post this before people go on school vacation?
Yes.
Okay, so I will send out that poll tonight.
That's great.
Okay. Anything from anybody on budget before we move on? All right, so, capital outlay. Sean, did you have a brief update on that?
Yeah, I'd give a quick update. So the Capital Outlay Committee met on Tuesday, February 4th. For the school department, I was in attendance, as well as Mr. Kidd, the Director of Technology, and they reconfirmed their committee leadership and voted the minutes, and then they jumped right into items for the Springtown meeting. Typically in the spring is when the school IT is put in front of the town meeting for approval. And very minor change from their 5-year plan that Mr. Kidd had. He was going to go forward with $75,000 for FY26. He's changed that to a request of $70,000. So he's planning to do the television media lab at the high school and to do a computer science refresh at the high school. Television lab was $40,000. You know, now that the high school's about 15 years old, things are starting to need to be replaced in some of these audiovisual and media labs. And the computer science refresh was $30,000. And he's adjusted his 5-year plan a little bit. It's roughly the same amount for the first 3 years, and then it starts to go up a little bit in the years 4 and 5. And they voted that to go to the Springtown meeting.
So I think Mr. Kidd presented that on his slides with the technology presentation. But
He
we
did.
do typically vote on it, so could we add that to the next agenda?
Sure.
To have our vote? Okay. Joan or David, do you have any questions on that?
No.
And Sean, do you meet again as capital outlay?
So after that, they dismissed us and went on with the rest of the meeting. I haven't heard, but I
Okay.
will see, I'll see Mr. Rosen tomorrow. I can ask him if there's another meeting coming.
Okay.
I think usually the Springtown meeting is only school IT, so the rest of it was updates on 25 projects and, schedule a future COC meeting. So I'll have to follow up to
Okay.
find out, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then moving along to old business, we do have our monthly review of the long-term agenda. Just opening that up. I've been providing my feedback all along, so is there anything that anybody else wants to make sure for Tim and Anne Marie that we get onto our long-term agenda?
Just a reminder for the committee here, Dr. Muniz will be leading us on the March 5th for that meeting.
Okay.
He'll be providing a SOA update as well on March 5th.
Are
And
you joining remotely for some of it? Or no?
I'm actually in flight. The flight
Oh.
got changed to that
Oh,
very time, so.
okay. Okay, so then we really need to add that budget meeting at the end of February.
Would like to.
Okay. Okay. One thing that we do need to change is the SAC quarterly report will not be on March 5th. There is an email between Dr. Galligan and myself and Anne Marie and Mr. Luff that we need to just finalize that loop of when we're going to meet with the SAC again, and then we'll move them. And then March 19th, that's still going to be our budget hearing, correct?
Yep.
Okay, and Lisa and Priscilla know to post that 2 weeks in advance? Okay. Anything on the long-term agenda at this time? Okay. We are allowed to discuss agenda offline, so if anything comes up, just shoot an email or let Mr. Luff and Anne Marie know. So the next item is the superintendent evaluation process timeline. We put this on the agenda as like a touch base. And Mr. Luff added the timeline that we have seen before. Kate and David, you are supposed to be the ones doing the process. Are you both still able and willing to do that?
Yes, yeah, we are, once the assessment is closed, then we get we all do our individual feedback in 17th, and then there's kind of a quick turnaround for us to composite it, correct? That's.
Yeah, so on the 5th, we're supposed to get from Mr. Luff his narrative.
Yep.
Also, I believe we're getting the 360 review responses that day. Was that taken care of with Lisa and sent out?
Yeah, all of the emails to the participants were sent.
Okay.
The form, the
Okay.
Google form.
So March 5th, we'll get the information from Mr. Luff. We'll get the responses from the 360 from Lisa. And then Kate and David, what we'll need from you on that day is all the different Google forms. And David, you've done that process before, right?
Yes. So they should be saved on the drive, correct?
So they're kind of saved on the drive. Mine are saved, but mine are saved as with my last responses. I would be happy to send that to you. Obviously, you're just gonna have to take out all my responses from 3 years ago.
The form.
The form. The actual
will-
form itself is gone.
Why is it gone?
Okay.
I wasn't in charge of it.
I will
Let me check.
email because I thought that I still had something buried somewhere, but I will look and reach out. But yes, we're still on for
I
that.
think I did it, didn't I?
So
Not
maybe
yet?
I don't have access to
I
them
might have.
anymore?
I might have it. Let me check
Okay.
later.
Yeah.
Not right now.
I definitely have my responses, so you could at least see the form and replicate it, but I no longer have access to
No,
the
I think I have
form.
All right, so we'll have Joan and David check their files.
So we would want the forms to be sent out to all of us on the 5th. That way we have from the 5th to the 17th to fill out our individual evaluations.
Uh-huh.
And then Kate, you and David will take those individuals to create the composite by the 20th.
I got it.
And then Tim, how do you want, if we have questions for you on anything from your self-evaluation, your narrative, you just want us to directly like reach out to you? How do you want that
I
orchestrated?
think directly reaching out to them.
Yep.
Are there any questions or any other comments from anybody on this next step of the process?
Nope.
Perfect. So next item is policy. Kate and Joan, did you have a policy subcommittee update?
Yeah, sure, just real quick, and then I'll hand it to Superintendent Luff. And that's sort of for the long-term agenda, but on the 5th, I think it said the 5th, not the first March meeting, we'll have guidelines, handbooky document for operations of the policy sub committee for you to look at. Today, we're just looking at IKF and a Title IX policy that Mr. Leff will update you on. Did you have anything, Joan?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So the first part of the memo here is on policy IKF, or graduation requirements. As you know, when the question 2 passed in December, or November's ballot, as of December, we removed the requirement for a competency determination to be in place based on the MCAS requirement, which was part of our policy, but also what the law took away. Since then, there's been a lot of conversation about the law actually still requiring a competency determination, or a CD, and in that particular case, something more so than just the graduation requirements, or the courses that you need to take to graduate. So after a lot of conversation, both Dr. Galligan and his counterparts, myself, and the other superintendents, guidance from DESE, we determined a pathway for students in Norwood to receive a competency determination that we felt was an appropriate way to move them forward, but also wasn't more so than the MCAS ever was. Keeping in mind that the MCAS at one point required essentially 9th and 10th grade ELA, 9th and 10th grade math, and a lab science, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Galligan put together a memo, and I won't read through that memo, but the policy recommendations here actually provide some quick modifications, essentially requiring that a grade 9 English art, grade 9 ELA, and grade 10 ELA or equivalent, Algebra 1 and Geometry or equivalent, Biology or Chemistry or Physics/Physical Science or equivalent would be for the requirements for a competency determination for classes 2026 and beyond. The equivalents essentially allow for flexibility for Dr. Galligan or the high school principal to work through what students have brought to the table already, what they have done on the outside as they transfer in. And also there is a transcript review option where students might come in with alternative programming where they meet those same levels, but it's just not labeled as an ELA or lab science or whatnot. And so that allows, in exceptional circumstances, for students to meet the competency determination as well. As far as the current class, essentially, as long as they met all coursework, based on the coursework and credits that you had approved in March 2021 prior to the changes for this year, that as long as they met the standards in math, ELA, and science, they would be able to be certified as having met the competency determination for the Norwood Public Schools. This allows flexibility, and it allows an equivalent, I would say equivalent model to what the MCAS did with students completing our coursework. So I'm asking for these changes in the policy tonight to be voted on.
And Dr. Galligan did come to our sub-meeting, and we talked through this and had the chance to ask questions, and the subcommittee does recommend adopting the changes.
So my only question, which I know I asked you over email, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding
Sure.
correctly with the math. So Algebra 1 and Geometry.
Mhm.
So for a number of kids in middle school, they're doing Algebra 1 at the Copley, and then they go into 9th grade in Geometry, and then they go on to Algebra 2. So I assume that's the or equivalent, right?
It could be, yeah. So right now, I mean, it would be the high school 9th grade Algebra 1, right? If they didn't take that, for example, Dr. Galligan could say they took that Algebra 1 and that's equivalent to what we would require for this, and they would be able to meet the competency determination that way.
Okay.
And I was surprised to find that that's what the MCAS was testing up.
Up to Algebra 1. Yeah. Well, that's why I kept asking. Remember when Dr. Wyeth was here, and I kept, you got to miss this one, JJ. At least I don't think I asked you. And it always drove me crazy with, well, I guess they're still taking MCAS, they're just not needing it for graduation. But your science, you test the year you take biology. So if you took biology in 9th grade, you took the test in 9th grade. If you took biology in 10th grade, you took it in 10th grade. But for math, everybody took it in 10th grade, even if you didn't take Algebra 1 since 8th grade. And it was just really driving me batty. All right, any questions or any motion to approve this updated IKF policy?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, I do have to pull individually. David?
No.
No? Okay, Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes, so that does pass 3-1.
Thank
So
you.
Teresa, if I can just say, I wanted to speak on this in my addenda,
Okay.
but I'm gonna wait until our next meeting to talk about it. I have some feelings about it just because I think it would be better in person than just hearing me over the screen, but thank you, I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, so the Title IX policy update?
Okay, so this one's fun. So I will just say that the Title IX regulations that went into effect on August 1st, 2024 have now been vacated by a United States District Court. So that brings us back to our requirements to go back to the old Title IX policies, the policies that were in place prior to this last time that you had voted on them. I think it was 2 months ago, I feel like. You voted on a bunch of policies. I would be remiss if I didn't, now that the laws have changed, bring you back those policies for your opportunity to decide whether you want to revert back to those policies. Now, that is a practice, regardless of what you do tonight, that we will follow the older policies because we have the certain investigation procedures in there based on Title IX. There is a question that this could change again. So I have two actions requested of you tonight, and you can choose whichever one you would like. But one is to approve the Title IX policy recommendations as provided in this memo, which revert the new policies that you have approved back to the old policies that were in place prior. Alternatively, you can choose not to vote for these new policies, in which case administration, I wish I would have spelled that correctly, would just follow the previous procedures until the time that we hear more information. And so I will take questions that you have. I think you know what the older policies were. I reviewed the new policies in detail in one of our previous meetings. But essentially, Mass law, regardless of what happens, still protects students that are in the classes that have been kind of pulled back from, in particular, sexual orientation, gender identity, for example. So, although we follow the federal law in Title IX obligations, we also follow Massachusetts law in anti-discrimination that is very different than federal law.
Questions, discussion? Okay.
I mean, my understanding is Tim's recommendation is actually, if you could underline it for us. So the Massachusetts law has hierarchy, and those protections are in place, even if we don't change change these again when they could possibly change again. And so in my mind, that might be more prudent because we're not losing protection there, but sort of biding our administrative time. But say, Tim, if you could just, especially for the public who might be quite confused, again, the changes, just if you could say what you're recommending.
Sure. So when the new laws went into effect at the federal level in 2024, they protected sex-based discrimination and harassment and added gender identity into that mix.
Mm-hmm. On federal.
When the new administration came in, there's this comment and this notion that there are only two genders and that there are no these policies, as well as a court ruling, that these policies should not protect sexual-based discrimination on behalf of folks for gender identity. So this now reverts back to the 2021. They're reverting back to the 2021 laws that still protect sex-based discrimination, sexual harassment. But it's not that the sexual harassment under federal law is not protecting gender identity. Right? Having said that, there are still anti-discrimination clauses in Massachusetts law that protect gender identity.
Right.
And so we are still not allowed to discriminate based on that. With this, we wouldn't have to follow the same procedural guidelines that the federal government requires us to do in Title IX investigations or other issues of sexual harassment. That is not to say that we would not investigate thoroughly any issues related to sexual harassment or discrimination on the basis of gender identity. We would. It just wouldn't fall under Title IX anymore.
Has DESE issued its own guidance about how we should be, because we're being held to there's two different standards now, right?
Well, Title IX is very clear in terms of how they proceed.
Yes, for Title IX, but in
Yeah.
terms of dealing with discrimination and harassment, has there been state-based guidance about how to deal with that?
There is a commissioner's letter that came out recently that very clearly talks about our requirements to protect, and I have not released that yet.
Okay.
There's actually conversations among many superintendents about releasing that together.
Okay.
I'm looking at the messaging on that first, but there is guidance that will be coming shortly.
So in essence, this changes how a discrimination may be investigated, but not necessarily what would be investigated in the state of Massachusetts because of our state laws.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. I may not use the Title IX procedures, but we would investigate any harassment based on gender identity.
And it's your assumption, based on what you said from the guidance that's coming from DESE, that would be expected by the state, that investigation, even if it is not exactly to the letter of the Title IX.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm trying to say is how it's going to be investigated may change. It might not fall under Title IX, but the protections for our students do not necessarily change because we're in Massachusetts.
Right. But do we need to change any of the language of the adoption we did in August? We're still going to, if we hold off because it may change again, we'll still be able to both follow those procedures and protect under the law under Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Title IX is a federal law, right? So the entire policy is written based on federal law. And now, based on what federal law has been modified to, the pieces under the policy, the definitions, all of that are actually not law anymore, right? So you have a policy that isn't exactly in line with what the federal law is when it's a federal policy.
Okay, so if we want to be in alignment, we do need to vote to change it.
You do. I mean, I would be surprised, well, I'm always surprised about things, but this could change again, right? So, there could be further guidance coming that could make us modify it yet again. So, I mean, I would be okay with you saying, well, let's not change anything yet, but follow the guidelines until we have further guidance. Follow the previous procedures until we have further guidance.
In August, when this came up, there was and is currently still, we had different ones for the high school and everybody else. Because there was a court order that we weren't allowed to make certain changes at the high school. And at that time, I was not in favor, still not in favor of the separate ones for the high school, which is now potentially what we're reverting back to for everybody. And I know at that time, all of you told me you can't have a policy that's out of alignment of law, and law is the hierarchy of the policy, and although I still understand that, I am not in favor at all in any way of reverting back to policies that I think are fundamentally wrong. So the first option for me, a vote to approve Title IX policy recommendations as provided in this memo, I'm a very hard no. Obviously, if my colleagues vote yes, I support the majority of the committee, but I personally am a very hard no. The alternative of you may choose not to vote for these new policies, in which case our administration would follow the previous procedures until such a time that we hear more information, is where I am inclined to go. I do not want my name attached in any shape or form as voting yes to revert. And I just want to be very clear on that. But since I am acting as chair, I should not make the motion. Would anybody like to make a motion, or is there further discussion?
I'm trying to think of how to phrase what I'm about to say. I don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
Say anything. Protections are in place, but I think we have always been held to multiple laws, federal and state. And we have relied on that. And we have relied on that in making several decisions, especially coming through COVID and those types of things. I see the federal law and the state law as just two different layers. And I don't see this as removing any protections from our students, which is why I will vote in favor for it, because it's not all or nothing. We have two different layers, and I guess because of my past history, I'm accustomed to having two different layers. This doesn't hurt our students, but being out of compliance with federal law could potentially hurt our students. So that's why I'm going to vote yes. It's because I believe that there will be no fundamental change in the protections for our students. If I lived in a state that didn't have these protections, then it would be a different conversation for me.
Yeah, I respect that.
So I feel like in my time here, I've heard different debates about the importance of districts keeping up with ever-changing or some policies that tend to change more often. And I think that people have been on different sides of it depending upon what it is. This is tough. I feel like I don't want it to come back to us. But can our policy be held against us in a way that could hurt us if it wasn't exactly in alignment? Because I would say otherwise I'm for abeyance, because I feel like it could easily change again. Unless someone's going to come after us because our policy doesn't exactly match. But I feel like, based on previous conversations that have been had, that that's not a thing that really happens.
Yeah, I mean, OCR can come in and say you don't have a policy that's in line with X, Y, and Z, right?
Not if there's no DOE.
Well, okay, fair enough, if there's no DOE.
Not if there's no OCR.
Well, yeah, it could go to some other organization, but Department of Justice instead, right? So they could look at our policy and say, okay, A, it's not compliant, right? But then they're going to look at our procedures and what we follow and how we've carried out the law, right? So if the policy isn't perfect, and there are always policies out there that aren't perfect because the law changes all the time, but the procedures that are being used to carry out whatever the law is are good, likely there will be less of an impact, right? So I would follow the Title IX procedures that are currently enacted in law, regardless of what the policy says.
Right.
Right? Even though the policy is your law, to me, I still have an obligation to follow the overall law too. So I think yes and no. I don't think the impact is as large as not following it, if that makes sense.
MASC has not put anything out on this yet, right?
Nope, they said school committee should consider going back to their old policies, but wait for further guidance as well. So that's where we are right now, last I heard from MASC.
I would move to place in an abeyance until further guidance.
Is that a motion?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I move to place these policies in abeyance until further guidance.
So just for clarification, that would be the first action requested, the vote to approve the Title IX policy recommendation as provided in the memo. Which might be.
Wait, where are you?
I'm looking at the very base of my vote to approve the policy recommendations. And those recommendations are to revert these policies, ACA, AC and B, AC, ACR back into place, and place the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 below it into abeyance until further guidance comes out. So it's going back to the older policies.
I read that as two choices because you've
Yep.
repeated policies here.
I did. So if you look.
So I'm motioning to put them in abeyance. Are you saying this isn't revert and? No, these are the same.
So
I'm confused.
the policies that I'm requesting that you revert back, so you have two choices: to revert these policies back and place these policies in abeyance at the same time. ACA, ACAB, AC, and AC-R are the old policies. All right? So these are the policies, and they say current, so I apologize for that up there, but these are the policies that were in place prior to your last vote. These 4. These 5 below that, ACA, ACB, the ones here, highlighted here on the second part, these are the new policies you voted in recently. So I would not want to get rid of those policies altogether because they may come back, right?
So this is because right now we currently have 2 sets of policies, right?
No, you don't anymore. You voted for one set of policies, and then I was following the procedures if I had to.
Procedure is
for the old
different.
one. So ACA, so the second paragraph here that I highlighted here, ACA, these are the policies you put into place at the last meeting,
Okay.
right? The policies before are the ones that you had in place prior to that. So if you are to go and vote for going back to the old policies, you're reverting these ones back, bringing these back, and then you are placing in abeyance these ones until such a time that I can bring them back hopefully later when the laws change again. I don't want you to have to go back and redo them all over again, so.
I'm so sorry, but aren't they the same thing?
So he has different versions of them. So the ones under abeyance, those are the ones you brought to us in August.
Yeah.
And we made changes to the first 4, but the ACA-R was brand new.
Yep.
So he's saying if we go back to August of '24, we
Yeah.
could vote to put all those 4 changes plus the new one in abeyance. But then at the same time, we have to do something with those policies, so then revert back to what we had from the audit that we did. Is that correct?
Yeah, it'd be better if I just said that these ACA is I'll call it the 2021?
22.
We'll call it 2022 policy. These ones up here are 2022. So you're going to go back to those policies if you reverting from the current policies back to those ones, and then taking the new ones, which are just below that, and just holding them off to the side until we are able to get more guidance later.
So under your action requested, we can either vote to approve what's in this memo, which is the reverting and abeyance altogether, or alternatively, we can say not to vote for these new policies in this memo, like just pause in all of it. Tim and his administration will follow the previous procedures, and we will wait to make any further policy decisions until we have more information. And what I was saying earlier is I'm in favor of the second one, the alternatively.
That's what my motion was for, because I understood the abeyance to mean the holding. But I got very confused because I still feel like I'm confused about these being the same thing. But as you explained it, I think we should put a hold on things until we have further. If we're following the procedures and the protection is there, then let's not revert.
So, okay, is your motion the second part of the action requested? So a motion to not vote for these new policies, in which case administration will continue to follow the previous procedures until such a time that we hear more information.
Yes, it's in the memo, Donna. Sorry.
You see it, the second part? Okay. So I will second that motion. Is there further discussion?
Does David have anything?
Okay, if there's no discussion, we can vote. Again, I'll individually poll. So David?
Yes.
Hang on, what is a yes vote, Clark?
So a yes is saying we are not taking any action
Okay.
on the policies tonight. Everything is being paused until we have more information, but Tim and the administration will follow the
Got it.
previous procedures.
I just was making,
Yep.
we went around in a couple of sections, so
Sure.
I just want to make sure.
All right, so I'm sorry, David, you said yes? You did?
He
Okay.
said
Yes.
All right, thank you. Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
No.
I'm a yes, so that does pass 3-1. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Luff, so CFCE update?
Yeah, so Mr. Mizuko gave me some detail on the CFCE. And this came from their staff as well as Clayton as well. The program right now is going great. They've been partnering with the Housing Authority and working with the library to really expand outreach to target this targeted population. They've also got some new grant funding to do a walking storyboard at the Indian Conservation, I think I pronounced that right, yes, Indian Conservation Area, which will be very popular this spring. In January, Liz Hogwell and her playgroup assistant, Marcia Thompson, rolled out a new season of playgroups for toddlers and preschools at the Poirier Village Center. PVC, I had to figure out what that was. It took me a little while, by the way. They said PVC. I was like, what's the PVC? So, got that. She's also developing a playgroup for this spring in partnership with the Boston's Children's Museum. They're offering a monthly grab-and-go bags and a free book and literacy and STEM activities. January's book was The Biggest Snowman Ever by Stephen Kroll. Liz is also running a playgroup at the refugee shelter to support an ESL class for parents and caregivers. And there's a lot more information on the CFC websites. So they're moving along. That's what I have for you for a verbal update on that.
Just one thing for us to think about when we go back to BBC. So we did transition this grant to the town because the grant was requiring us to match $40,000, and last year we weren't sure we could have that $40,000, and Mr. Merzuko said he could make it available in his budget. But I'm hoping that this program and that $40,000 is remaining in the general government budget for FY26, but I would like to see evidence of that. Because if it's not, then maybe we should take it back. But that's my personal opinion.
Fair enough.
Okay. So we already had our update on the middle school structure and scheduling. So legislative advocacy, this is usually the time of the year that we do talk about it. I did touch base briefly with Ms. Jody Smith, who said she is willing to do some advocacy with us. The past 4 or 5 years now, we've been jointly advocating with our union. I did reach out to John Rogers and Mike Rush to try to schedule something. I have not yet heard back, so I will ping them again. But I just wanted to get a sense from everybody on what topics we do want to advocate for. The past 2 budget cycles, we have been asking for an increase in Chapter 70. We've been asking them to look at the foundation funding for how public education is funded. We have asked them to pass a law that Medicaid reimbursement comes directly to the school district, not to the municipality. That has not yet happened. We have also asked the past 2 years for them to look at how much money can go into our sped reserve, because right now law says it can be up to 2% of your net school spending. In the past, we've asked for that to be increased to 4%. None of these things have come to fruition, but I don't know if they are items that we want to continue to advocate for. I did not yet have a chance to look into any of the bills that are coming up in this budget cycle, so I do not know if there are new bills out yet. I would need to look into that. But just wanted to have a quick discussion and hear from my colleagues, what are the topics, and also hear from Dr. Munoz, Mr. Mannion, and Mr. Leff on, where should we be investing some advocacy hours.
Yeah. And just quickly to the legislative breakfast, February 28th, 9 o'clock for those school committee members that want to go, and obviously inviting those legislators there too. Would be great.
No, I was at a MASBO meeting yesterday, and it was a lot of legislative things there. Senator Lewis from 5th Middlesex, he was a friend of MASBO and very involved in the foundation thing. So one thing, it was a lot of the similar themes to what you just mentioned, but the foundation budget has to be reviewed every 10 years, and that actually is happening this year. Okay. So it's a good time to advocate for changes in foundation. He's working with the Lieutenant Governor and the President of the Senate. Many of them are working on foundation budget. And he briefly mentioned that one aspect of the foundation that's sort of broken is there's a cap that the state can only pay up to 82.5% of the foundation, and what's happened is under the SOA, the districts that are under that have really seen much bigger increases than the districts that are sort of at that cap. I think Norwood's kind of like right on the line there, but so the foundation review is actually up. That is happening. So that's something to jump on, I think, if you can.
Okay.
But they people in the audience, other school business managers mentioned like the sped reserve is an issue with a lot of them. Chapter 70 is an issue. I mean, they even mentioned, you know, some other issues, but that just happened yesterday, so.
I also
But
heard one where they're referring to collaborative placements, actually being 3 times the foundation rather than 4 times the foundation before circuit breaker.
Okay.
Which is a great way to actually increase collaborative placements more so than out-of-district, private placements, which are much more expensive, and then facilitate more funding back to the districts, obviously.
Okay. Other topics or items that you want me to look more into?
I think the ones
Funding.
that you've been on are
Yep.
still relevant. When you say nothing's come to fruition, and I just want to be clear, do we mean that our reps have not written any bills around that, or that just in general, were you saying that, like, obviously those things haven't changed yet?
Definitely the things have not changed yet. Jody, do you remember, I don't feel like Russia Rogers wrote anything last year, but I think after we met with them, they co-sponsored some.
They have co-sponsored
Yeah.
things, they definitely have. I don't think that they have put anything through themselves.
Yeah.
But they've been extremely receptive and understanding of what we're saying. I just think that if you keep at it, you're more likely to get something. And with the current temperature, I would also recommend maybe sending something to our congressional folks.
Okay.
So,
We can look into that. There was something I just saw yesterday. There's a new coalition. I don't know if anybody in this room knows about it, but United for Our Future. So apparently MASC, NASBO, MTA, a number of other organizations. I did not see the Mass Superintendent's organization on it, though.
Okay.
They seem to be all partnering, specifically around funding. So I can try to look more into what that means. It just is something that came up on one of my news feeds.
I got something from MTA.
Would you send it to me?
I will.
You can?
And I can share with you too, MASS, the legislative priorities here around special education, long-term physical health.
Okay.
Yep, I have a whole thing,
Okay.
school district funding.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, if anybody has anything that you can send me, and then I can try to put a more concise document together for our next meeting.
Yeah, I would second Jody's point though about tapping our,
Congressional.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's late, congressional,
Yeah.
just around, continued around funding, any diversion of funds from public schools for other
Yep.
priorities will hurt us tremendously.
Absolutely. Okay. So I'll put something together for our next meeting. So we do have a number of items on our consent agenda. So we talked about changing consent agenda up and just voting on everything.
Yep.
But some of these things, I wonder if they do need to be pulled out. It's been a while since we voted on something as a surplus. I also saw out in the community, there's been some confusion around surplus. Apparently the town may be changing their surplus policy. I don't know if that impacts us or not, so I feel like we should talk about the surplus one just for a few minutes before we vote on it.
Did something change with this agenda here?
Yeah, it's not working anymore.
What happened to the actual consent agenda piece of it? That's something just changed.
I don't know. I have it right here, but.
That's
I
good.
don't-
Let's keep that one going, please. I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
I don't know what happened here.
Oh, now it's working.
I have it up on mine.
Oh, no, you just see how
So,
this actually says consent agenda
yeah, the donations.
for,
Oh.
something happened.
I don't know. Did
All
I
right.
bump something? I did on your side.
But that's okay, so, well, surplus.
So we have the Harvard University visit stipend. We have a rebate, the monthly budget transfer report, and then the surplus. And I think if we go into our new business, it should be in the agenda, in the packet. It's still there, right?
It's still here.
And by the way, that monthly budget transfer is one that doesn't need approval, that's just for your information.
That was just a
Yeah.
report on what
Yep.
Superintendent Leff
Yep.
approved. Okay.
So So you have them in your packets, so
Yep.
that's fine. And obviously, if you make a vote to pull the surplus out, that's fine. I can share that separately.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to pull out the surplus item. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor, David?
Aye.
Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a yes as well, so we'll pull that one out, but then, Mr. Luff, if you want to do the rest together.
Yes, so obviously we have donations from the Harvard University visit stipend. We have the Ohio Pile rebates, H at Haskell, and $24.79. Those are donations, and we also have the budget transfers and the monthly budget transfer reports that were provided by Mr. Manning to you for the consent agenda vote.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda minus the surplus.
Thank you, Joan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kate. Any discussion? David?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well, so that passes 4-0. And then, Mr. Luff, if you could just talk to us briefly about the surplus.
Sure. So the middle school has a tremendous amount of textbooks that they're requesting to be declared as surplus. They are outdated textbooks. They're no longer used, and most have been replaced by online resources. So Dr. Fraxik had asked me to request of you to declare them as surplus, in which case they can figure out a way to get rid of them at value
Okay.
based on the town's policies.
So these are all textbooks from 2001 to 2014, just so the community knows. What was that, Mr. Bell?
And there's even some.
Even some before.
As someone who's currently working on cleaning out his classroom.
Move to approve as surplus.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kate. Any discussion? David?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well. But could I just ask Mr. Mannion and Mr. Luff, if it is true, if the town is updating their surplus policy, could you keep us informed of
I will.
what that entails?
We can do that.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, before we go into school committee agenda, I know nobody wants to go back into executive session, but there was one discussion that I do feel we need to talk about for 5 more minutes to give the budget subcommittee a little bit more direction tomorrow, or it might make some of our discussions tomorrow with BBC a little, I just won't have all your feedback is what I'm saying. So if we go back into executive session for no more than 10 minutes,
Okay.
would my colleagues be okay with that?
For the purposes of what?
To finish one of our discussions around some contract negotiation items that do impact the budget, just so we can have some more direction as we work on the budget.
Let's just do it if we're gonna do it.
You have to make a motion.
Yes, okay, let's move to go into executive session.
Okay, well, okay, I guess actually I skipped. We should do school committee addenda first, I'm sorry. And then we can move to
Okay.
executive session. I just wanted to put it on everyone's radar that I think we need to go back in for 10 minutes. But we'll go to school committee addenda. David, do you have anything this evening?
I do not.
All right, thank you. Kate?
No, thank you.
Joan?
No, thank you.
I don't have any other than don't kill me colleagues. So at this time, if somebody could please make a motion to go back into executive session for the purposes of finishing up a contract negotiation discussion.
So moved.
Thank you, Kate. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Joan. David?
Yes.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes.
Joan?
Yes.
I'm a yes as well. So 4-0. At this time, 10:14, we will go back into executive session very briefly. We will only reconvene in open session for the purpose of adjournment. And then we will be scheduling a meeting for the week of February 24th. As soon as we schedule that, that'll be posted in accordance with open meeting law. And then we will be back in this room on March 5th. So thank you, everybody.